Hi there. Throughout human history, countless events, civilizations, and individuals have shaped the world we live in today, from the rise and fall of empires to groundbreaking discoveries and cultural revolutions. Every moment in the past has left its mark on our present and our future. By exploring history, we gain valuable insights into how societies have evolved, how ideas have spread, and how people have overcome challenges across time. In this video, we'll take a closer look at one chapter of our shared human story, uncovering the facts, contexts, and lessons that continue to resonate today. The dawn of the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete stands as a pivotal moment in the story of human development in the Mediterranean, marking the rise of one of the most enigmatic, culturally rich, and artistically advanced societies of the ancient world. Emerging around 3000 BCE in the early Bronze Age, the Minoans represent Europe's first true civilization, preceding the grandeur of classical Greece and Rome by over a millennium. Their roots lie deep in the Neolithic past of the island, where early farming communities had been established as early as 7000 BCE by settlers possibly from Anatolia or the Levant. These settlers brought with them domesticated plants and animals, simple tools, and the knowledge of settled agriculture, which gradually transformed the rugged island landscape into arable zones and laid the foundation for societal complexity. Over thousands of years, these humble communities evolved in sophistication, adapting to Crete's unique geography, a combination of fertile plains, jagged mountains, and expansive coastlines that offered not only natural protection but also access to maritime routes. The sea became central to the identity of the Minoans, and from the earliest stages, they developed a symbiotic relationship with it, harvesting its resources, navigating its routes, and eventually establishing trade networks that stretched from Egypt and Mesopotamia to the Cycladic Islands and mainland Greece. Crete's isolation in the Aegean afforded the Minoans a relative peace and independence in their formative centuries, allowing a distinct culture to flourish. Early Minoan settlements, often located on hills or near rivers, slowly transitioned from small hamlets to more structured villages with communal storage areas, megaron-style houses, and rudimentary temples. The abundance of local resources such as timber, obsidian, and fertile soil facilitated this growth. By around 2600 BCE, with the onset of the early Minoan period, social stratification began to appear. Communities started organizing themselves around hierarchical principles. Chieftains or clan leaders gained influence. Local trade became specialized, and burial customs became increasingly elaborate. Burial sites from this period, particularly Tholos tombs and cave burials, reflect the emergence of elite classes who had access to imported luxury goods, symbolic grave markers, and differentiated rituals suggesting both wealth and social control. Concurrently, pottery began to reflect regional styles and more intricate designs, indicating the beginning of cultural divergence and artistic specialization. The sophistication of these ceramics, eggshell-thin kamares ware with its vibrant geometric and naturalistic motifs points not only to technical mastery, but also to a society placing increasing value on aesthetics and ritual symbolism. By the Middle Minoan period, circa 2000 BCE, the civilization experienced a dramatic transformation with the emergence of palace-centered urbanism. This was a watershed moment, often considered the true dawn of classical Minoan civilization, when the major palatial centers at Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, and later Zakros were constructed. These structures were unlike anything seen in Europe at the time. Rather than being solely royal residences, they functioned as multi-purpose complexes housing administrative offices, religious sanctuaries, artisan workshops, storerooms for surplus grain and oil, and ceremonial courtyards. The construction techniques of these palaces were remarkable, multi-storied with light wells, ventilation systems, complex plumbing, and frescoed walls that depict scenes of courtly life, religious rituals, in the natural world. The sheer scale and complexity of these buildings suggest the presence of a centralized authority capable of mobilizing vast labor forces, engineers, and artisans, pointing toward a relatively stable and organized society. Knossos, the largest and most elaborate of these, likely served as the capital and possibly the seat of a high priest king, though no evidence of militaristic dominance has been found, highlighting the possibly peaceful and cooperative nature of Minoan governance. At least in the early phases, Minoan society was built on a combination of agriculture, artisan production, and expansive trade. They cultivated grains, olives, grapes, and flax, and bred livestock such as cattle, sheep, and goats. Surplus agricultural production enabled the growth of urban centers and supported a class of full-time artisans who produced exquisite goods: ceramics, stone vases, textiles, metal tools, and luxury items such as jewelry, carved ivory, and inlaid weapons. Minoan traders established long-distance connections with Egypt, the Levant, and even faraway Mesopotamia. This exchange was not merely economic. It brought cultural influences that the Minoans reinterpreted in their own unique visual language. Egyptian scarabs, Mesopotamian cylinder seals, and Syrian-style motifs were reimagined through Minoan aesthetics and incorporated into frescoes, sealed designs, and religious paraphernalia. The Minoans also developed early forms of writing, Cretan hieroglyphs and Linear A, both used for administrative and possibly religious purposes, though neither has been fully deciphered. These scripts, mostly found on clay tablets and seal stones, suggest a bureaucratic society capable of record-keeping, taxation, and possibly law. Religion played a central role in Minoan life from the earliest stages. The Minoans practiced a polytheistic faith focused on nature deities, goddesses of fertility, and sacred animals, especially bulls. The prominence of the bull in Minoan iconography seen in frescoes of bull leaping, horned altars, and sacrificial rituals may have roots in earlier Neolithic bull cults or Near Eastern traditions. Women occupied an unusually prominent role in religious life, frequently depicted as priestesses or goddesses, suggesting a potentially matrilineal or matrifocal society, or at the very least, one in which women held significant spiritual authority. The most iconic religious symbols of Minoan belief include the snake goddess, figurines representing female divinity, and the chthonic forces of fertility and regeneration, and the sacred double axe or labyrinth, possibly linked to initiation rites or ceremonies. Sacred groves, mountaintop shrines, and caves also served as important centers of worship. Linking the Minoans deeply to their environment, rituals may have involved dance, music, animal sacrifice, libations, and processionals, as suggested by ceremonial objects and fresco scenes. The early Minoan period also saw the emergence of a distinctive visual and architectural style that would influence not only later Greek art but also the entire Mediterranean cultural sphere. Their artistic achievements are particularly visible in their frescoes, painted directly onto wet plaster walls in palaces and villas. These images, vivid and fluid in execution, portray marine life, acrobats, dancers, and ritual processions with a dynamism that was unprecedented in the ancient world. Unlike the more rigid and hierarchical representations of contemporary Egypt or Mesopotamia, Minoan art emphasized motion, naturalism, and joy. The scenes often lack any reference to warfare, slavery, or harsh rule, underscoring the interpretation that early Minoan society may have been relatively egalitarian and non-militaristic. This peaceful disposition is further evidenced by the absence of defensive walls around most palaces and cities, although some scholars debate whether this reflects genuine peace or confidence in their maritime power and isolation. This formative stage in Minoan civilization was not without disruption. Around 1700 BCE, many of the major palaces were destroyed by earthquake or fire, but they were quickly rebuilt larger and more elaborate than before. This resilience speaks to a society that had already achieved a level of organization capable of recovery and regeneration. It also marks the transition from the Old Palace period to the New Palace period, often considered the Minoan Golden Age, in which their power, art, and influence reached unparalleled heights. But this transition would not have been possible without the foundational advancements, innovations, and cultural values laid down during the dawn of their civilization. In essence, the dawn of the Minoans was not a single moment but a gradual awakening that spanned centuries, driven by geographic advantages, early agricultural surplus, maritime connectivity, artistic ingenuity, and religious coherence. It was a time of social evolution, spiritual exploration, and technological experimentation. From humble Neolithic villages to monumental palaces adorned with mythic frescoes, the Minoans created a legacy that would echo through history through Greek myths of King Minos and the Labyrinth, through Homeric memory, and eventually through archaeological rediscovery by Sir Arthur Evans in the 20th century. The roots of this remarkable civilization nurtured in the valleys and shores of ancient Crete represent a rare convergence of peace, beauty, and complexity that set the Minoans apart from their contemporaries and firmly established them as a foundational culture in the Western historical tradition. The dawn of the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete stands as a pivotal moment in the story of human development in the Mediterranean, marking the rise of one of the most enigmatic, culturally rich, and artistically advanced societies of the ancient world. Emerging around 3000 BCE in the early Bronze Age, the Minoans represent Europe's first true civilization. Preceding the grandeur of classical Greece and Rome by over a millennium, their roots lie deep in the Neolithic past of the island, where early farming communities had been established as early as 7000 BCE by settlers possibly from Anatolia or the Levant. These settlers brought with them domesticated plants and animals, simple tools, and the knowledge of settled agriculture, which gradually transformed the rugged island landscape into arable zones and laid the foundation for societal complexity. Over thousands of years, these humble communities evolved in sophistication, adapting to Crete's unique geography, a combination of fertile plains, jagged mountains, and expansive coastlines that offered not only natural protection but also access to maritime routes. The sea became central to the identity of the Minoans, and from the earliest stages, they developed a symbiotic relationship with it, harvesting its resources, navigating its routes, and eventually establishing trade networks that stretched from Egypt and Mesopotamia to the Cycladic Islands and mainland Greece. Crete's isolation in the Aegean afforded the Minoans a relative peace and independence in their formative centuries, allowing a distinct culture to flourish. Early Minoan settlements, often located on hills or near rivers, slowly transitioned from small hamlets to more structured villages with communal storage areas, megaron-style houses, and rudimentary temples. The abundance of local resources such as timber, obsidian, and fertile soil facilitated this growth. By around 2600 BCE, with the onset of the early Minoan period, social stratification began to appear. Communities started organizing themselves around hierarchical principles. Chieftains or clan leaders gained influence. Local trade became specialized, and burial customs became increasingly elaborate. Burial sites from this period, particularly Tholos tombs and cave burials, reflect the emergence of elite classes who had access to imported luxury goods, symbolic grave markers, and differentiated rituals, suggesting both wealth and social control. Concurrently, pottery began to reflect regional styles and more intricate designs, indicating the beginning of cultural divergence and artistic specialization. The sophistication of these ceramics, eggshell-thin kamares ware with its vibrant geometric and naturalistic motifs points not only to technical mastery, but also to a society placing increasing value on aesthetics and ritual symbolism. By the Middle Minoan period, circa 2000 BCE, the civilization experienced a dramatic transformation with the emergence of palace-centered urbanism. This was a watershed moment often considered the true dawn of classical Minoan civilization when the major palatial centers at Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, and later Zakros were constructed. These structures were unlike anything seen in Europe at the time. Rather than being solely royal residences, they functioned as multi-purpose complexes housing administrative offices, religious sanctuaries, artisan workshops, storerooms for surplus grain and oil, and ceremonial courtyards. The construction techniques of these palaces were remarkable, multi-storied with light wells, ventilation systems, complex plumbing, and frescoed walls that depict scenes of courtly life, religious rituals, and the natural world. The sheer scale and complexity of these buildings suggest the presence of a centralized authority capable of mobilizing vast labor forces, engineers, and artisans, pointing toward a relatively stable and organized society. Unlike the centralized monarchy of Egypt, Minoan rule appears to have been more decentralized and theocratic in nature, with no definitive evidence of a single autocratic king. Instead, religious figures, priestesses, and high-ranking officials possibly operating as part of a council or religious bureaucracy may have held real power. Some scholars suggest that a ruler priest or queen priestess could have presided over ritual functions at each palace, reflecting the sacred and administrative fusion that defined Minoan power. The lack of royal tombs, militaristic inscriptions, or visual propaganda about conquest suggests that Minoan authority rested on spiritual and economic control rather than force. And this unique model helped stabilize palace culture for generations. Palace culture also gave rise to a rich and distinctive artistic tradition that became one of the hallmarks of Minoan identity. Nowhere is this more evident than in the exquisite frescoes that adorn the walls of the palaces, villas, and public buildings. Painted using the true fresco technique, applying pigment to wet plaster, these artworks brought color, life, and symbolic meaning into the architectural environment. The themes of the frescoes varied: dolphins leaping across waves, bulls charging through arenas, women in flowing garments participating in rituals, and nature scenes brimming with flowers, birds, and marine creatures. The arts celebrated life, fertility, nature, and the human form, often in dynamic motion and emotional expression. There was a remarkable gender parity in representation, with women appearing frequently, confidently, and with elaborate hairstyles and costumes, suggesting both their high status and their central role in ceremonial life. In scenes such as the famous Toreador fresco from Knossos, young acrobats, both male and female, are shown vaulting over bulls, a practice that may have been part sport, part ritual, symbolizing human mastery over nature and the cyclical rhythms of life. The aesthetics of Minoan art, curved lines, vibrant colors, and a celebration of the living world convey a worldview that was holistic, sensuous, and imbued with reverence for life and nature. Religion itself became more formalized under palace culture, integrated into the very architecture and daily rhythms of the palace centers. Each palace contained central shrines, ritual vessels, altars, and sacred symbols such as the double axe labries, the horns of consecration, and representations of snake as birds and bulls. The goddess remained the central divine figure in Minoan religion, typically associated with nature, fertility, mountains, and animals. Snake goddesses clad in flounced skirts and bare-breasted were emblematic of regenerative power, life cycles, and the underworld. Processional frescoes, offering tables, and the architectural alignment of palaces with solstices and mountain peaks all point to an organized religious calendar and ceremonial life. Mountaintop sanctuaries, such as those at Juktas and Petsofas, served as open-air temples where offerings were left, prayers were made, and rituals conducted in proximity to the divine forces of the landscape. Sacred caves, like the one at Psychro, believed to be the mythical birthplace of Zeus, were also integrated into the spiritual geography of the Minoans. The palaces, therefore, were not simply administrative centers but cosmic diagrams, linking the human and divine through space, light, ritual, and seasonal celebration. At the core of palace culture was the sea, the lifeblood of the Minoan economy, and the artery through which culture, goods, and ideas flowed. Minoan ships, sleek and advanced for their time, carried olive oil, wine, pottery, textiles, and precious metals to distant shores in exchange for luxury goods such as gold, ivory, papyrus, and exotic spices. Their maritime networks extended to Egypt, the Levant, Anatolia, and the Cyclades, establishing Crete as the center of a vibrant thalassocracy, a sea-based empire. Yet this empire was not marked by military conquest or colonization, but rather by trade, diplomacy, and cultural influence. Minoan goods have been found in the ruins of Avaris in Egypt, at Ugarit on the Syrian coast, and at Akrotiri on the island of Thera, suggesting not only commercial ties but the transmission of Minoan aesthetics and values. In fact, the art of Akrotiri, often dubbed the Pompeii of the Aegean, closely mirrors Minoan fresco styles, showing the deep cultural impact of Palace Crete across the wider Aegean. The birth of palace culture also transformed the rural landscape of Crete. Around each palace, a network of satellite settlements, villas, farms, and harbors developed. These outposts helped funnel agricultural produce into the palatial economy and extended administrative control into the hinterlands. Villas often mirrored the architectural style of the palaces, though on a smaller scale, suggesting that local elites were integrated into the palace hierarchy. Roads and paths linked palaces to religious sites, harbors, and markets, while the standardization of pottery styles, weights, and building techniques reinforced the cohesion of Minoan society. The countryside, once dominated by kin-based villages, was now subordinated to the rhythm and rituals of the palace system, creating a unified cultural landscape that stretched across the island. By 1700 BCE, just as palace culture reached its zenith, disaster struck in the form of widespread destruction likely caused by a combination of earthquakes and internal unrest. Yet the resilience of the Minoans is evident in the rapid reconstruction of the palaces on even grander scales. The so-called New Palaces period saw the further elaboration of architecture, art, and ritual, indicating that palace culture had become deeply ingrained in Minoan life and identity. The rebuilt process but a civilizational revolution. It represented the crystallization of centuries of social, economic, religious, and artistic development into a cohesive and monumental form that defined the Minoan identity. Palace culture transformed the island from a constellation of regional regional communities into a unified, literate, prosperous, and spiritually expressive civilization with far-reaching influence, it set the stage for the Minoans' golden age and left a legacy of urban planning, art, and ritual that would echo through later Mycenaean, Greek, and even Roman traditions. The Minoan palaces were not just buildings. They were living temples, economic engines, and political nerve centers that animated the very soul of ancient Crete and, in doing so, carved the Minoans, placed as one of the great foundational cultures of the ancient Mediterranean world. The figure of King Minos, perhaps the most iconic and enduring persona connected with Minoan Crete, straddles a tantalizing divide between myth and history, between epic storytelling and the possible reality of an ancient ruler whose life and reign became so deeply embedded in cultural memory that he was transformed into a near-divine character. His legend has echoed through the ages, immortalized in the works of Homer, dramatized by the tragedians of classical Athens, preserved by Roman poets, and resurrected by modern archaeologists like Sir Arthur Evans. But was King Minos a real person, a dynastic title, a symbolic figurehead, or merely a mythic creation born out of cultural imagination? In attempting to uncover the truth behind King Minos, one must navigate the intertwined threads of Greek mythology, archaeological evidence, Minoan religious symbolism, and the broader socio-political fabric of Bronze Age Crete. According to later Greek traditions, Minos was the wise and just king of Crete who, each year, demanded a tribute of Athenian youths to be sacrificed to the Minotaur half-man, half-bull monster confined within a vast labyrinth built by the architect Daedalus beneath the palace of Knossos. This story, deeply woven into the Athenian psyche, represented both an ancestral guilt and a symbolic victory of rational order over primitive fear, as Theseus, the Athenian prince, slays the Minotaur and escapes the maze with the help of Minos' daughter, Ariadne. The myth of Minos was not confined to just one tale. It evolved. In some versions, he was portrayed as a tyrant; in others, as a lawgiver and judge of the dead in the underworld, placed by Zeus alongside Rhadamanthys and Aeacus to judge the souls of men. His dominion was often described as absolute, commanding fleets that ruled the sea and establishing order and civilization across the Aegean. However, the name Minos itself may not refer to a single individual, but rather to a dynastic title, much like Pharaoh in Egypt. This hypothesis gains traction when one examines how the name persists across multiple generations in myth and how it seems to represent both a man and an institution, namely kingship itself. In this view, Minos may have been a royal or priestly title passed down from ruler to ruler, particularly in Knossos, the most prominent Minoan palace complex. Arthur Evans, the pioneering British archaeologist who uncovered Knossos at the beginning of the 20th century, was so influenced by this interpretation that he dubbed the entire civilization the Minoans, a name they never used for themselves. Evans was convinced that behind the Greek legends lay a historical reality, that Knossos had once been ruled by a powerful monarch whose memory inspired the Greek myths centuries after the civilization had fallen into obscurity. Evans interpreted the labyrinthine architecture of the palace at Knossos as the historical basis for the myth of the labyrinth, with its endless corridors, twisting stairways, and multitude of rooms. He even found imagery of bulls and double axes, labris, so frequently within Minoan iconography that he theorized a bull cult existed in Crete, providing a ritual basis for the Minotaur legend. The palace itself, without defensive walls and dominated by religious iconography, seemed to reflect a society governed more by ritual than by military might, lending credence to the image of a priest-king figure like Minos, part ruler, part divine mediator. Yet modern scholarship has become more cautious in making direct identifications between myth and reality. While there is no inscription or contemporary document that names a King Minos, there is growing evidence from Minoan and later Mycenaean records, particularly in Linear B, of complex administrative hierarchies that included high-ranking officials, possibly kings or regional rulers. The discovery of administrative tablets at Knossos written in Linear B by the later Mycenaean Greeks reveals a system of centralized palace governance involving Awanax, a Mycenaean word for king, high priests, scribes, and overseers, although the Minoans themselves wrote in Linear Ale, which remains undeciphered. The continuity in administrative structure between the Minoans and the Mycenaeans suggests that similar roles may have existed earlier. The absence of militaristic imagery or royal monuments in Minoan culture has led some scholars to suggest that Minoan kingship was fundamentally different from that of Egypt or Mesopotamia, instead of divine autocrats. Minoan rulers may have derived their authority from religious roles as high priests or ceremonial figures rather than through coercive power. This would align with the portrayal of Minos not only as a king but as a lawgiver and judge, someone who embodied cosmic and legal order. The central courtyard of the Knossos Palace, likely the site of major religious ceremonies, could have served as a ritual stage where such a ruler conducted processions, festivals, or sacrificial rites, reinforcing his spiritual authority. The mythic Minos association with bulls and the labyrinth may also reflect deeper symbolic systems within Minoan culture. The bull-leaping ceremonies depicted in frescoes across multiple palaces, especially at Knossos and Tiryns, are unique in the ancient world. In these depictions, young acrobats are shown grasping the horns of charging bulls, flipping over their backs, and landing behind them. Dangerous and highly ritualized performance that must have had profound religious or social significance. This act of leaping over a bull may have been a rite of passage, a fertility ritual, or a symbolic reenactment of control over primal forces. The bull's importance in Minoan religion alongside the prominence of the double axe suggests a spiritual cosmology centered around duality, sacrifice, and natural cycles. If Minos was indeed a real ruler, he would likely have served as the chief orchestrator of such rituals, reinforcing his position as an intermediary between the gods and the people. The labyrinth, then, might have been more than a literal structure. It could have symbolized the complexity of spiritual initiation, the winding journey of life and death, or even the maze-like structure of palace governance. The Minotaur, half beast and half man, may represent the merging of animal instinct with human consciousness, a metaphor for taming the chaos within. These layers of meaning deepen our understanding of Minos not just as a ruler but as a symbolic archetype. The legacy of Minos extended beyond Crete. In the Athenian imagination, Minos became a symbol of oppressive imperial power, an ancient foe subdued by Theseus, the Athenian hero who embodied reason, civic virtue, and Athenian identity. The myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, with its themes of sacrifice, resistance, and liberation, likely served a propagandistic function in classical Athens, transforming historical memory into political myth. Minos' demand for tribute from Athens may have been a garbled recollection of Minoan hegemony in the Aegean during the peak of the thalassocracy, when Cretan fleets dominated trade routes, influenced art and religion across the Cyclades, and possibly even imposed economic tribute. Yet, intriguingly, in other Greek accounts, Minos is portrayed as a wise legislator, so revered that after his death he became a judge in the underworld. This dual characterization, tyrant and sage, mirrors the dual nature of Minos, historical and mythic legacy, both feared and admired, both distant and foundational. If he did exist, Minos may have been remembered differently in various regions, his image reshaped by political needs, cultural memories, and shifting identities. Further complicating the question of Minos' reality is the absence of monumental tombs, inscriptions, or royal statues in Crete explicitly identifying a singular king. Minoan palaces do not contain the lavish burial chambers that one might associate with a king of Egypt or a Mesopotamian ruler. Instead, elite burials were dispersed across the island in thalos tombs, rock-cut chambers, and occasionally within house complexes, often accompanied by goods but lacking any obvious royal markers. This decentralization of burial practices suggests that power may have been distributed among elite families, or that the concept of divine kingship was not as pronounced. Alternatively, it could imply that the body of the ruler like Minos was hidden, sacred, or symbolically inaccessible, consistent with his later portrayal as an immortal judge in the afterlife. The myth that Minos was the son of Zeus and Europa may also encode a cultural memory of foreign origin or divine sanction, legitimizing a ruling dynasty's authority through mythic ancestry. Archaeological evidence continues to offer tantalizing clues. The throne room at Knossos, discovered by Evans and carefully restored, contains an alabaster throne flanked by benches and guarded by griffins painted on the walls, a setting that has been interpreted as either the audience, chamber of a king, or the sanctuary of a high priestess. While Evans believed the throne belonged to King Minos, later scholars have argued that it may have been used by a priestess or a symbolic figurehead during ritual ceremonies. The ambiguity of this room mirrors the ambiguity of Minos himself, a figure both political and religious, both human and divine. No definitive proof has emerged to settle the debate, but the atmosphere of the room with its ritual basin, sacred griffins, and orientation to the central courtyard strongly suggests that whoever sat on that throne was at the nexus of power, ritual, and myth. In essence, King Minos as a historical figure remains elusive, but his cultural presence is undeniable. Whether or not there was ever a single man named Minos who ruled Crete, the legend reflects something deeply true about Minoan civilization. Its complexity, its maritime dominance, its religious depth, and its lasting impact on Greek memory. Minos may have been a memory of a Minoan ruler preserved through oral tradition. He may have been a title used by successive kings, or he may have been a title used by successive kings, or he may have been a cultural archetype invented by later Greeks to make sense of the grandeur of a lost world. The enduring power of the myth, however, speaks volumes. Through the lens of Minos, we glimpse the awe that later cultures felt toward Minoan Crete, a land of palaces without walls, of bulls and labyrinths, of priest kings and sea empires. Whether myth or man, Minos has become the symbolic face of a civilization whose sophistication continues to challenge our understanding of prehistory and whose shadow continues to stretch across the centuries. Daily life in Minoan Crete, though buried beneath the volcanic ash of Thera, the ruins of palaces, and the fragmentary remains of frescoes, tablets, and ceramics, reveals a civilization uniquely elegant, prosperous, and sophisticated, with a social fabric interwoven by commerce, ritual, nature, art, and community. Unlike many of their contemporaries, whose lives were often dominated by war, conquest, and rigid social hierarchies, the Minoans appeared to enjoy a relatively peaceful and balanced way of life. This peace, however, was not accidental. It was cultivated through a harmonious relationship with the natural world, advanced technology, religious systems that emphasized renewal and fertility, and a well-structured but seemingly flexible social order. The geographic blessings of Crete itself, a large, fertile island positioned at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe, meant that the Minoans were never far from trade, innovation, or inspiration. Their daily routines, whether in bustling palace centers like Knossos or in the tranquil farmsteads of the countryside, were colored by seasonal rhythms, agricultural duties, religious festivals, domestic life, artisanal crafts, and lively communal gatherings. The average Minoan's day began with the sunrise over the Aegean, casting light upon the whitewashed homes and multi-story villas nestled into terraced landscapes and coastal towns. Most people lived in modest stone or mud brick homes, plastered and painted, often with flat roofs used for drying crops or sleeping during summer nights. The houses were well ventilated, organized around central courtyards, and connected by narrow, winding lanes designs that provided privacy, air circulation, and security. Even in non-palatial towns, some homes had indoor plumbing, clay bathtubs, and drainage systems, a remarkable luxury for the Bronze Age. Wealthier homes and villas often featured multiple stories, fresco-painted walls, wooden beams, staircases, and paved floors, showing a high standard of living for the elite. Inside, people slept on wooden beds with woven mats or textiles, and stored goods in ceramic jars, wooden chests, or built-in wall niches. Domestic hearths provided heat and cooking fire, and kitchens, although small, were usually well equipped with tools for grinding, baking, and boiling. Minoan society was largely agrarian, with agriculture forming the bedrock of daily economic activity. Men and women worked together in the fields, cultivating wheat, barley, lentils, olives, grapes, figs, and flax. Olive oil and wine were staple products of the Minoan economy, used both domestically and for export. The Cretans were skilled in terracing the mountainous terrain to grow crops efficiently, and irrigation channels helped manage water in the more arid regions. Herding was also essential. Sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs were raised for milk, meat, hides, and wool. Farmers used wooden plows drawn by oxen, and manual labor was supplemented by a class of workers and possibly slaves. Although slavery in Minoan Crete was likely less brutal and institutionalized than in later Greek society, in coastal towns, fishing added diversity to the diet, with fresh fish, octopus, shellfish, and sea urchins being commonly consumed. Honey from beekeeping was the primary sweetener, and herbs such as oregano, thyme, and sage were used not only in cooking but in medicine and rituals. Food preparation and communal meals were central to Minoan life. Cooking was done over open fires or in clay ovens, and meals typically included bread, vegetables, fruits, cheese, meat or fish, and diluted wine. Ceramic tableware, jugs, and goblets were often beautifully decorated, indicating that even ordinary meals had an element of artistry. Banquets were more elaborate and served as social or religious occasions, often accompanied by music, dance, and feasting. It required agility, courage, and training, and may have been performed during major festivals. Music, dance, and storytelling also played key roles in both daily amusement and religious devotion. Musical instruments such as double pipes, harps, and drums created lively soundscapes for performances that blended entertainment with sacred symbolism. The Minoans were skilled navigators and sailors, and their proximity to the sea shaped their calendar, diet, economy, and outlook. Boat building and seafaring were daily occupations in port towns, and maritime exchange brought foreign goods, ideas, and visitors. Sailors left home for weeks or months, establishing trade posts, exchanging wares, or delivering diplomatic gifts. The wealth generated by trade enriched palace economies and allowed ordinary citizens access to exotic items like Egyptian faience, Mesopotamian seals, and Anatolian copper. This connection to the wider world also brought Minoans into contact with other cultures, making their daily life cosmopolitan and dynamic. Though peace was the norm, the Minoans were not defenseless. Weapons such as swords, daggers, and armor have been found, and guards likely protected palaces and ships. However, the absence of fortresses and warrior iconography implies that violence was not glorified, and warfare was not central to their society. Daily security came more from social cohesion, religious unity, and maritime control than from standing armies. The Palace of Knossos, often referred to as the crown jewel of Minoan civilization, stood as the architectural and cultural heart of ancient Crete, radiating not just administrative power but spiritual majesty, aesthetic brilliance, and economic centrality that defined the Minoan world at its peak. Nestled in the fertile valley of the Kairos River and surrounded by gently rolling hills, olive groves, and fig trees, Knossos was more than a palace. It was the vibrant epicenter of a living civilization, where life pulsed through its vast courtyards, workshops, shrines, stairways, and corridors in rhythmic harmony with the natural world and the sacred cosmos. Stretching over more than 20,000 square meters, the complex wasn't a single uniform structure, but a living organism of multi-story buildings, colonnaded porticos, light wells, storage magazines, ceremonial halls, and residential quarters, all connected through a seemingly chaotic but highly functional labyrinthine plan, giving rise to the enduring myth of the labyrinth itself. Constructed and reconstructed over centuries beginning around 1900 BCE and reaching its final grand form by 1450 BCE, Knossos exemplified the genius of Minoan engineering and artistic sensibility, fusing practicality with elegance, sacred with secular, and tradition with innovation in a manner no other Bronze Age site could match. At the heart of Knossos lay its central courtyard, a vast open plaza that served as the nucleus of palace life, where religious processions unfolded, dancers twirled in religious ecstasy, acrobats leapt over bulls in electrifying rituals, and citizens gathered in awe before their rulers and deities. From this central space, a labyrinth of staircases and passages led to various wings of the palace, each designated for specific purposes: administrative record-keeping, artisan production, grain and oil storage, religious ceremony, or royal residence. The architecture of Knossos was defined by its verticality and flow, with upper stories crowned by wooden beams and light wells allowing natural illumination to flood interior rooms, ventilating the space and softening the boundaries between inside and out. The Minoans' mastery of space is evidenced in their use of ashlar masonry, stuccoed walls, and timber-reinforced frameworks that allowed the palace to withstand the tremors of Crete's earthquake-prone landscape. Among its many innovations, Knossos boasted one of the earliest known plumbing systems in the world, featuring terracotta drainage pipes, flushing toilets, and bathtubs, which speaks volumes about Minoan concerns for hygiene and comfort. In its west wing, a series of deep storage pits called couleurs aunts held the surplus of the kingdom's agrarian wealth: olive oil, wine, grain, and honey stored in massive pithoi jars, each inscribed with administrative symbols in linear 80, a testament to the palace's function as a redistributive economic hub. Here, scribes meticulously recorded inventories, trade exchanges, and offerings to the gods, while officials oversaw taxation and organization. Unlike the palaces of Mesopotamia or Egypt, Knossos lacked defensive fortifications, suggesting a society that projected its influence through trade, religion, and diplomacy rather than through martial dominance. The peaceful essence of Knossos is further reflected in its vivid frescoes, which adorn nearly every corridor and chamber of importance, not depicting scenes of war or conquest, but rather joyous festivals, marine life, religious ceremonies, and nature's beauty in all its forms. The frescoes of Knossos are unparalleled in Bronze Age art, both for their technical brilliance and for their thematic boldness. Painted in the true fresco technique, pigment applied to wet plaster, they capture motion, emotion, and color with such lifelike grace that they transcend time. The Prince of the Lilies struts with a divine confidence amidst fields of blooming flora, his crown of peacock feathers and diadem hinting at a ritual or royal identity. The bull-leaping fresco, one of the most iconic images from Knossos, shows youths vaulting over the horns of a charging bull in a display of athleticism and religious symbolism, possibly commemorating fertility rites or seasonal renewal festivals. The dolphin fresco from the Queen's, Megaron, showcases aquatic life with an elegance and playfulness that suggests deep spiritual reverence for the sea. These frescoes weren't mere decoration. They were symbolic visual texts, interweaving Minoan cosmology, social ideals, and ceremonial life into the very fabric of their architecture. Each room in Knossos told a story, each wall a canvas for myth and memory. The throne room of Knossos, located in the west wing of the palace, remains one of the most enigmatic and symbolic spaces in all of Minoan archaeology. At its center sits an alabaster throne carved directly into the wall, flanked by benches that suggest an audience or ritual council, while the frescoed griffins that guard the space convey a sense of divinity and kingship. Whether this room served a religious high priestess, a ceremonial king, possibly Minon, or a spiritual mediator is debated. The presence of a lustral basin nearby implies sacred initiation or judgment rituals. Some scholars believe this throne room encapsulates the symbolic core of Minoan theocratic rule, where divine law was interpreted through ritual action, not imposed by force. Elsewhere in the palace, lustral basins, pillar crypts, and altar-like platforms reinforce the idea that Knossos was as much a temple complex as it was a royal residence. Religious life permeated every hallway, from the rooftop altars to subterranean chambers. The palace was a vertical axis connecting the divine and earthly realms. Beyond administration and religion, Knossos was a bustling economic powerhouse and artisan center. Workshops lined the palace's eastern wing, where smiths forged tools and weapons from bronze, artisans crafted intricately carved stone vessels, and potters spun exquisite ceramics such as marine-style amphorae and floral-decorated cups. These goods were not only used locally but exported far and wide, appearing in Egypt, the Levant, Anatolia, and across the Aegean, often imitated by other cultures. Knossos was the beating heart of Minoan trade, its harbors at Amnisos and Heraklion, ferrying goods in and out in a rhythm as steady as the tide. Its economic power supported a sophisticated urban population, a class of scribes, officials, merchants, and priests who maintained daily life within the palace complex and the surrounding city. Outside the palace, the city of Knossos stretched in all directions, home to thousands who lived in smaller houses, apartments and workshops, villas with frescoed walls, private altars, and even bathrooms have been found, suggesting that prosperity extended beyond the palace elite. Roads connected Knossos to other palace centers and sacred sites, and way stations with large storage areas ensured that goods and travelers moved efficiently across the island. Festivals, rituals, and games animated the yearly calendar at Knossos. The palace, spacious courtyards likely served as stages for theatrical performances, bull games, sacred dances, and processions led by priestesses dressed in colorful robes and diadems. Music filled the air as double pipes, lyres, and drums accompanied chants and hymns to earth goddesses and sky deities. Sacred symbols like the double axillabri, horns of consecration, and snake motifs appeared in frescoes, sculptures, and votive offerings, reinforcing the palace identity as a cosmic axis at place where seasonal change, agricultural renewal, and divine presence were ritually enacted. The mountain peaks of Crete, visible from Knossos, were also integrated into this sacred landscape. Rituals conducted on nearby Mount Juktas, believed to be a tomb of a dying god or a resting place of the divine king, were linked to the palace's spiritual life. The art of Minoan Crete stands as one of the most striking and sophisticated achievements of Bronze Age civilization, a visual language that spoke to the deepest values, cosmologies, and sensibilities of a people who saw beauty not as mere ornamentation, but as a bridge between the natural and divine, the daily and the eternal. Minoan art was not simply decorative, it was functional. Sacrative, it was functional. Sacred, celebratory, and profoundly symbolic. It flowed through every level of Minoan life, painted on the walls of palaces, etched into seals, shaped into figurines, molded into pottery, woven into textiles, and carved into ritual objects. From the palatial grandeur of Knossos and Phaistos to the villas of the countryside and the shrines tucked into sacred caves and mountaintops, Minoan art infused space with meaning, light, and energy. Its signature motifs, spirals, bulls, double axes, marine life, lilies, snakes, motifs, spirals, bulls, double axes, marine life, lilies, snakes, goddesses were more than aesthetic choices. They were symbols rooted in ritual, fertility, cosmology, gender, and myth. Minoan artists mastered a range of media, including fresco painting, ceramic decoration, metalwork, faience, ivory carving, and seal engraving, and in doing so created a unified and expressive artistic tradition that remains unequaled in the Bronze Age Aegean. Their works communicate not just their technical skill and love for life, but also a deeply spiritual vision of a world in which humans lived in harmony with nature, reverenced the cycles of birth and renewal, and honored divine forces that animated all things. Among the most celebrated aspects of Minoan art are its frescoes, which adorn the walls of palaces, villas, and public buildings with vivid scenes of daily life, ceremonial pageantry, nature, and mythic symbolism, painted while the plaster was still wet. These true frescoes fuse pigment and wall into a single durable surface, allowing color and movement to leap forth with astonishing clarity even after millennia. What distinguishes Minoan frescoes from other ancient art is their celebration of motion, rhythm, and joy in place of rigid poses and hieratic figures. Minoan art depicts dancers mid-twirl, dolphins gliding through water, monkeys climbing trees, and women in elaborate dress leading processions or offering libations. These images reveal not only a high degree of aesthetic sophistication, but also a society that exulted in life, ritual, and the vibrancy of the natural world. The famous Toreador fresco from Knossos depicting acrobats leaping over a charging bull exemplifies this dynamic spirit. Whether a literal event or a symbolic rite, the scene encapsulates themes of bravery, ritual passage, and the taming of primal forces. In the e-procession fresco, elegantly dressed men carry vessels as offerings, perhaps during a seasonal festival or a fertility rite. The dolphin fresco from the Queen's Megaron speaks to a culture enchanted by the sea, whose myths and livelihoods were shaped by the rhythms of the ocean. These images were not isolated scenes, but part of a broader narrative visual theology composed in brushstroke and color, where each animal, plant, gesture, or color held layered meanings. Color in Minoan art was never arbitrary. Blue represented both the sea and the sky, realms of divine passage. Red evoked life, power, and masculine energy, while white often denoted feminine purity or spiritual transcendence. These chromatic codes extended beyond frescoes into pottery, textiles, and religious symbols. Motifs were equally loaded with meaning. The bull, central in Minoan symbolism, represented both virility and divine force. Associated with the storm god or a solar deity, it appeared in frescoes, painted pottery, figurines, and the grand ritual of bull leaping, whose risk and spectacle may have honored the balance of life and death, chaos and order. The double axe, or labris, was another core symbol, often associated with female divinities, the chthonic earth, and the sacred mountain, found carved into walls, painted on ceramics, and used as ritual tools. The double axe may have symbolized the balance between destruction and creation, or the fusion of masculine and feminine energies. Closely tied to the labris were the horns of consecration, stylized bull horns placed atop buildings and altars to mark sacred spaces. The snake, revered in figurines and votive offerings, was a powerful symbol of regeneration, fertility, and the underworld. It slithered between worlds, often appearing in the hands of goddess figurines or coiled at their feet, guardians and conduits of sacred transformation. Equally important were representations of the great goddess or goddesses of Minoan religion. Minoan art abounds in female figures adorned with flounced skirts, bare chests, jewelry, and elaborate hairstyles. They appear not as passive or secondary, but as commanding and divine, leading rituals, blessing animals, or embodying seasonal cycles. The famous snake goddess figurines, made of faience and found in the temple repositories of Knossos, are among the most iconic religious artworks of the ancient world, holding serpents in both hands, with wide, unblinking eyes and exposed breasts. These figures radiate power, fertility, and transcendence, whether literal deities or priestesses in divine ecstasy. Their iconography echoes throughout Minoan ritual life. Another significant category of Minoan art was seal carving, in which artisans etched intricate designs onto small stones used to stamp clay documents, jars, or doors. These seals, some only centimeters across, depicted complex scenes of myth. Animal combat, goddesses flanked by griffins, sacred trees, or even celestial symbols, Far from mere administrative tools, they were miniature canvases, repositories of personal and ritual identity, often worn as pendants or amulets. Ceramic art formed another central pillar of Minoan symbolism. Minoan pottery ranged from the practical to the ceremonial, from coarse cooking pots to finely painted vessels with delicate marine and floral motifs. Styles evolved over centuries, from the bold geometric kamores ware of the Middle Minoan period to the naturalistic marine style of the late Minoan palaces. In the marine style, octopuses stretch across amphorae, their tentacles curling around the form of the vessel in perfect synergy between image and shape. Fish, coral, seaweed, and shells team across jars and flowing, rhythmic patterns reflecting the Minoans' reverence for the sea, not just as a source of sustenance, but as a spiritual and symbolic realm. Other vases featured papyrus flowers, lilies, crocuses, and ivy plants associated with ritual purity, rebirth, and divine presence. These vessels were often used in libation ceremonies, feasts, or burial offerings, embedding their visual language into sacred contexts. Similarly, Minoan artisans produced elaborate stone vessels from steatite, serpentine, or alabaster, many engraved with scenes of harvest, ritual processions, or animals, further demonstrating how art permeated all layers of ritual and social life. Minoan metalwork, too, combined utility with meaning. Gold signet rings, ceremonial daggers inlaid with hunting scenes, or ornate hairpins all testified to the confluence of artistry and spiritual resonance. Weapons were rarely depicted in Minoan art, and when they were, it was in ceremonial rather than combative context, perhaps indicating their symbolic role in rites of kingship, masculinity, or initiation. Burial goods often included art objects, necklaces, stone seals, painted pottery, or faience amulets. This inclusion speaks to a belief that beauty and symbolism accompanied the soul into the afterlife, serving as guides, protectors, or identity markers in the realm beyond. Perhaps most profound was how Minoan art connected to cosmology and sacred space. Palaces were not just political centers, but visual temples saturated with color, iconography, and sacred geometry. Frescoes were not isolated images, but arranged as narrative cycles, inviting initiates and viewers into visual participation with myth and ritual. Rooms were aligned with celestial bodies, altars oriented to solstices or equinoxes, columns colored red, symbol of blood, birth, life forth, life forth, life forths, and sanctuaries embedded with double axes or goddess figurines. Every surface, object, and pathway within Minoan sacred architecture carried symbolic meaning, mirroring their worldview that the material world and the divine world were intertwined. Minoan art also extended into performance, though much of it is lost to time. Frescoes show dancers, musicians, and celebrants in ceremonial garb, suggesting that song, dance, and costume were vital forms of living art. Processions with robes, masks, garlands, and rhythmic movement likely reenacted mythic stories or honored divine beings. Music played with lyres, flutes, and drums added sonic texture to these visual and spatial experiences. In this way, Minoan art was not just something to be seen, but something to be heard, touched, felt, and performed. It was multisensory and immersive, a total expression of life and belief. In conclusion, the art and symbolism of Minoan Crete offer a window into one of the most refined, spiritually vibrant, and visually literate cultures of the ancient world. It reveals a society in love with beauty, profoundly connected to nature, and deeply invested in ritual and myth. Their art was not merely reflective, it was transformative, a means of communing with the divine, of affirming identity, of preserving stories, and of celebrating the joy and mystery of existence. Long after their civilization disappeared, buried by time and upheaval, the symbols of Minoan Crete continued to echo in the myths of Minos and the Labyrinth, in the art of Mycenaean Greece, in the sacred groves and rites of later Hellenic religion. Today, the dolphins still leap across palace walls, the bull still charges across painted amphorae, and the goddess still raises her serpents to the heavens. Minoan art lives not only in museums but in our imagination, where it continues to whisper the ancient songs of a people who made beauty their law and symbolism their soul. The religion and rituals of Minoan Crete formed the sacred backbone of their civilization, guiding not only their relationship with the divine, but also shaping their politics, architecture, social customs, seasonal rhythms, and interactions with nature. Unlike the more hierarchical, war-centered religions of contemporaneous societies like Egypt or Mesopotamia, Minoan religion exuded a spirit of inclusivity, fluidity, naturalism, and sensual celebration of life. It was an embodied, earth-based spirituality steeped in symbols of fertility, regeneration, celestial alignment, animal reverence, and ecstatic participation. Every palace, home, mountaintop, cave, and field was a potential sanctuary, spaces where humans and deities, nature and ritual, met in harmony. While no sacred texts or priestly codices survive to map their theology, the archaeological and artistic legacy of Minoan religion speaks eloquently through sacred symbols, ritual architecture, votive offerings, and frescoes that portray humans not as groveling before the divine, but dancing, leaping, feasting, and embracing life in its fullness. Central to their religious world was the feminine principle of the goddess or goddesses who governed the fertility of the land, the turning of the seasons, the health of the people, and the cycles of life and death. The Minoan great goddess, often depicted with bare breasts, flowing skirts, snakes coiled in her hands, and a calm, commanding gaze, was more than a deity. She was the living embodiment of earth, sky, sea, and womb. A divine mother, queen, and priestess, all in one. Her worship was pervasive, personal, and public, and rituals honoring her were conducted in palaces, peak sanctuaries, household shrines, and sacred caves across the island. At the core of Minoan religious practice was the concept of sacred renewal, a cyclical understanding of time, fertility, death, and rebirth. This worldview manifested in agricultural rituals, solstice festivals, seasonal dances, and offerings made to the earth to ensure the return of crops, animals, and rain. The Minoans marked the year through a sacred calendar that likely tracked celestial events such as solstices, equinoxes, lunar phases, and the heliacal rising of stars like Sirius. Their temples and palaces were aligned with astronomical precision, indicating that their rituals were deeply connected to the heavens. Mount Juktas, looming near Knossos, was believed to be the resting place or tomb of a dying and resurrected god, possibly the youthful male consort of the goddess who died each year and returned. With the harvest, in this mythos, the goddess and her son lover embodied the earth and its seasonal rhythms, union, fertility, death, and return. Rituals reenacting this myth may have included symbolic marriages, hieros gamos, sacrificial offerings, and ecstatic dance performances held in palace courts or mountaintop sanctuaries. Sacred symbols permeated every aspect of Minoan religious life. The double axe or labrys was one of the most powerful emblems associated with the goddess, the palace, and ritual power. It appeared carved into stones, painted on altars, and cast in bronze for ceremonial uses. The labrys may have symbolized the duality of life and death, heaven and earth, or male and female. Another ubiquitous motif was the horns of consecration, stylized bull horns placed on rooftops, altars, and temple facades to mark holy places and perhaps to capture the divine presence. The snake, often held by the goddess in figurines, represented regeneration, healing, and the chthonic realm of the underworld. It slithered between worlds, a creature of soil and stone, signaling the mysterious forces of life that lived beneath the surface. Trees, especially the olive, fig, and cypress, were also sacred and were often venerated in rituals involving tree shaking, libations, or symbolic marriage between the priestess and the deity of the tree. Sacred caves served as chthonic shrines and places of initiation, where votive offerings, figurines, and libations were deposited. The Cave of Camares and the Psychro Cave, Dictyan Cave, are among the most famous, filled with relics indicating long-term ritual activity. Similarly, peak sanctuaries, high atop mountains like Petsophes and Traostalos, served as open-air temples where processions ascended to meet the divine. Here, the sky and earth were bridged by ritual, and worshippers left clay figurines of humans, animals, and body parts, likely symbolic petitions for health, fertility, or divine favor. Religious rituals were not confined to remote or hidden spaces. They animated the very heart of urban and palace life. The great courtyards of Knossos, Phaistos, and Melia were not merely administrative zones, but sanctified grounds where festivals, processions, and performances unfolded before the eyes of hundreds, if not thousands, of spectators. These rituals likely involved sacred music, costume dance, animal sacrifice, libations of wine or oil, and public spectacles such as bull leaping. The bull was central to Minoan religion, representing strength, virility, and the untamed forces of nature. The act of leaping over bulls depicted in countless frescoes was not merely sport but a sacred drama, possibly signifying a rite of passage, communion with the divine, or symbolic triumph over chaos. Dancers wore ceremonial costumes, masks, and flowing garments, and moved in choreographed sequences around altars, trees, or deities. Priests and priestesses likely led these rites, but their exact hierarchy is unknown. Some scholars argue for a dominant priestess caste, given the prominence of female figures in art and ritual space, while others suggest a dual-gender clergy sharing responsibilities across festivals and temples. Minoan religion also left a strong material footprint in the form of votive offerings and ritual paraphernalia. Sanctuaries were filled with terracotta figurines, kneeling worshippers, deities, bulls, snakes, birds, and offering bearers, all testifying to the piety and participation of the Minoan people. Bronze tripods, libation jugs, rhytons, ceremonial drinking vessels, and lustral basins sunk in spaces used for ritual purification further indicate a ritual structure of sacrifice, cleansing, and communion. Libations, the pouring of wine, milk, or honey onto altars or the earth were a common feature of these rites, symbolizing nourishment for the gods or the renewal of fertility. Some shrines even contain clay, models of buildings, altars, or temples, suggesting a practice of dedicating symbolic miniature structures to deities in prayer or thanksgiving. In elite tombs and ritual sites, gold signet rings have been found bearing elaborate engraved scenes of worship, initiation, and other worldly journeys. These rings function both as seals and talismans, inscribed with sacred imagery that may have functioned like spells or prayers. The afterlife in Minoan belief remains mysterious, but burials indicate that death was not the end, but a transformation. People were buried with food, drink, tools, and ritual objects, suggesting a continued existence in another realm. In some tombs, figures are placed in a fetal position, possibly symbolizing rebirth into the next world. The use of cave burials and peak tombs further reinforces the idea of sacred geography as a mirror of spiritual transition. Caves symbolizing descent into the earth and peaks signifying ascent to the divine. Ancestors were possibly venerated in household rituals, their spirits invoked for protection or guidance. It is also likely that Minoan religion involved initiation rituals, perhaps connected to fertility, adulthood, or priesthood. Scenes on gold rings and seals show human figures being led by divine beings through sacred landscapes, emerging from trees, or engaging in trance-like dance. These may represent spiritual journeys, ecstatic transformations, or visionary experiences. In some interpretations, the palace itself may have been a ritual labyrinth, its twisting corridors, hidden rooms, and light-filled courts symbolizing the soul's journey through complexity toward revelation. The story of the labyrinth and the Minotaur, though filtered through later Greek myth, may preserve a distant echo of these rites of passage, where the initiate Theseus enters the unknown, confronts inner beasts, Minotaur, and emerges transformed with divine knowledge or freedom. Religious festivals likely punctuated the Minoan year. Days of fasting. These festivals may have included days of fasting, followed by communal feasting, athletic games, song competitions, theatrical reenactments of myths, and fertility rites involving sacred union. Sacred garments, flowing robes, beaded headdresses, bare chests, ornate jewelry were worn by both priests and priestesses, enhancing the ceremonial grandeur and sensory richness of the rites. Music and dance were essential more than entertainment. They were acts of devotion, harmony, and communication with the divine. The religion of Minoan Crete, in its essence, was a celebration of life cycle's birth, growth, death, return, and its symbols were rooted in the rhythms of nature, the mystery of the cosmos, and the intuitive knowledge of the body and earth. It transcended rigid dogma or hierarchy and instead invited participation, wonder, and beauty. Women played central roles, perhaps as priestesses, goddesses, or ceremonial leaders. Animals were revered not as symbols of domination, but as allies and embodiments of divine qualities. Natural forces, the sea, sky, sun, and soil were sacred teachers. Unlike the later patriarchal pantheons of Olympus, the Minoan spiritual world was matrifocal, fluid, and wild, mirroring the mystery and movement of the island's own volcanic and fertile terrain. Today, even though the spoken prayers and chanted hymns of Minoan priests have been lost to time, the symbols remain. The labyrinth still guards ancient sanctuaries. The goddess still lifts her snakes in sacred calm. The horns still crown the sky, and the fresco dancers still leap and whirl through corridors of light. Minoan religion, far from being a forgotten relic, continues to whisper from the stones of Crete, luminous testament to a people who lived not in fear of the gods, but in joyful communion with them, who saw divinity not only in temples but in flowers, bulls, mountains, seashells, and the human body itself. It was a religion of grace, beauty, balance, and mystery on that left behind no commandments, but a legacy of sacred art, sacred spaces, and sacred rhythms that still pulse beneath the island winds. In the vibrant heart of Minoan Crete, sport was not merely a pastime or physical contest, it was a sacred performance, a ritualized expression of harmony, agility, and divine communion, deeply intertwined with religion, aesthetics, and the very identity of the people. Of all the athletic practices that flourished within the palatial courts and sun-drenched fields of this Bronze Age society, none was more iconic, mysterious, and culturally central than bull leaping, a ceremonial spectacle immortalized in frescoes, seal carvings, and myth, and deeply embedded in the symbolic matrix of the Minoan world. Far from being a brutal blood sport or gladiatorial display, Minoan bull leaping, as depicted in their art, was a graceful, almost acrobatic choreographed encounter between human and beast that celebrated the mastery of the body, the rhythm of nature, and the courage of youth. It was as much theater and rite as it was athletic display. In the great central courtyards of palaces like Knossos, crowds may have gathered in festival attire, music playing from double pipes and lyres, as young men and women, dressed in elaborate ceremonial garb, prepared to face the sacred bull. The event was likely timed with seasonal festivals, perhaps tied to solar or lunar cycles, and held in honor of deities associated with fertility, the earth, or the sacred masculine and feminine forces in union. The bull, long revered as a powerful religious symbol representing virility, storm and cosmic energy, was not sacrificed in this ritual, but engaged as a divine partner in a highly structured performance. The Torredor fresco from Knossos captures the essence of this act. A leaper grabs the horns of the charging bull, vaults into the air, and somersaults over its back in a feat of strength, timing, and grace, before landing behind it, arms outstretched in triumph. This ritualized bull sport was not undertaken in isolation. It emerged from a broader athletic culture in Minoan Crete, one that valued physical fitness, bodily aesthetics, rhythmic movement, and competitive excellence, not only as displays of prowess, but as acts of social and spiritual significance. Young Minoans were likely trained from adolescence in various physical disciplines: jumping, running, wrestling, tumbling, dancing, each woven into the religious and civic life of their communities. Their bodies, depicted in frescoes and statuary, reflect an ideal of lithe, agile musculature rather than brute strength, suggesting that skill, control, and beauty were the prized athletic virtues. Women and men alike are shown participating in bull leaping and dance, indicating a culture in which gender inclusivity in sport was not only accepted but celebrated. This dual participation speaks volumes about the Minoan worldview: egalitarian, harmonious, balanced, and perhaps reflects their reverence for the union of masculine and feminine energies in both ritual and society. While the precise rules, training regimes, and structures of these sports are lost to history, their importance is preserved in the spaces and imagery left behind. The architecture of palaces, especially the vast open courtyards at Knossos, Phaistos, and Malia, suggest designated zones for public performance, where sports and spectacles took place before priestly elites, ruling families, and citizen audiences. These events likely coincided with seasonal festivals, possibly linked to planting, harvest, solstices, or the renewal of kingship, where athletic contests, feasts, dances, and processions were seamlessly blended into sacred celebrations. The bull itself held profound significance in Minoan religion, myth, and ritual. As a symbol of raw natural force, fertility, and the dynamic pulse of the cosmos, it was simultaneously feared, revered, and embraced. Bulls appear not only in sports scenes but in religious iconography, frescoes, seal stones, and votive sculptures. Their horns crowned altars, buildings, and sanctuaries as horns of consecration, while their image stamped coins and decorative vessels. The labries, or double axe, often associated with bulls, suggested ritual control over natural power, perhaps echoing ancient myths of the divine taming of chaos. The act of leaping over a bull was thus not merely a display of human skill, it was a symbolic drama where the initiate or leaper confronted the chaotic power of nature, passed through a moment of danger, and emerged spiritually transformed. Some scholars have interpreted bull leaping as a rite of passage, a liminal experience through which boys and girls became men and women, accepted into the religious or social hierarchy through demonstration of their courage, coordination, and dedication. Others see it as a symbolic marriage, where the leaper, priest or priestess, engaged the bull divine force, and a ritual dance reflecting fertility, death, and renewal. These interpretations are not mutually exclusive and likely reflect the multifaceted meaning of Minoan rituals, which operated on symbolic, social, and spiritual levels all at once. In addition to bull leaping, Minoan Crete supported a vibrant range of other sports and athletic practices, many of which are preserved in miniature representations and wall paintings. Wrestling, for instance, is depicted in seal impressions and decorative items where athletes are shown in dynamic poses grappling, flipping, and holding each other in stylized yet believable stances. Wrestling, as in many ancient cultures, was likely both a sport and a method of training for physical resilience, mental focus, and communal bonding. Running competitions may have been part of religious festivals, similar to the foot races of later Greek games. While the Minoans do not seem to have emphasized chariot racing or martial displays like the Mycenaeans or later Greeks, they clearly prized movement, agility, and balance, especially as it related to music and ritualized dance. Dance in Minoan Crete was both an art and a sacred activity often performed in groups, in circular patterns, possibly around altars, sacred trees, or labyrinth-like spaces. Dancers are depicted in various costumes, flounced skirts, tight bodices, feathered headdresses, and their gestures evoke not only joy but invocation, trance, and symbolic storytelling. These performances likely mirrored myths or enacted seasonal transformations, weaving athleticism into the very fabric of spiritual life. Music accompanied nearly all these events. Lyres, double pipes, percussion instruments, and clapping may have provided the rhythmic foundation for sports, processions, and dances, blending the auditory and the physical into one harmonious ritual. The physical setting of Minoan athleticism, sunlit courts, airy halls, open terraces, and mountain slopes suggests a culture deeply attuned to the beauty and power of the natural world. Minoans trained and performed not in coliseums or enclosed stadiums, but in spaces open to the sky, aligned with solar paths, and embedded within sacred landscapes. Even their urban centers maintained a sense of organic flow, with streets, homes, and sanctuaries all opening into communal gathering areas where movement and ritual could unfold. The connection between sport and nature was not incidental, it was essential. Athletic events were themselves reflections of the cycles of nature: growth, energy, climax, and renewal. The body was not seen as separate from the earth, but an extension of it, the vessel of divine force. Capable of expressing cosmic truths through movement, courage, and harmony, Minoan sports also had social and political dimensions. Athletic festivals likely served as occasions for elite families to showcase their wealth, sponsor public rituals, and assert their connection to divine favor. Victorious athletes may have gained prestige, gifts, or religious roles, while performances reinforced communal identity and pride. In the sophisticated and symbol-rich world of Minoan Crete, writing was not merely a utilitarian tool for accounting or administration, it was a bridge between the spoken and the sacred, the temporal and the eternal, the human and the divine. The evolution of writing in Minoan civilization reflects not only their administrative sophistication, but also their symbolic mindset and spiritual consciousness. The island's writing systems, namely Cretan hieroglyphs and linear A, remain among the most enigmatic and intriguing elements of the Bronze Age Aegean world. These scripts, carved into clay tablets, inscribed on seals, painted on ceramics, and impressed onto administrative nodules, speak of a society that had reached remarkable heights in governance, trade, and religious organization. And yet, despite the thousands of tablets and artifacts discovered, the full meaning of Minoan writing eludes us. Linear A has resisted decipherment for over a century, and as such, the true sound and meaning of Minoan words are veiled in silence. But through the material traces, contextual patterns, and artistic aesthetics of these scripts, scholars have reconstructed not only their probable uses and forms, but also glimpses into the worldviews and social systems that birthed them. These scripts offer us clues into a civilization that revered symbolic order, engaged in complex long-distance trade, tracked offerings and inventories, recorded sacred rituals, and communicated power through symbols as much as through speech. The earliest known Minoan writing system, dating to around 2000 BCE, is what modern scholars call Cretan hieroglyphics, so named because of its resemblance to Egyptian hieroglyphs. Although the two systems are unrelated, these hieroglyphs were used mainly on seal stones and clay administrative documents. They consist of pictographic signs, representations of animals, tools, body parts, and abstract symbols that may have served both phonetic and ideographic functions. Cretan hieroglyphs were likely used in the early palace centers such as Knossos, Malia, and Phaistos, and their appearance coincides with the formation of centralized bureaucracies and economic control systems. While still undeciphered, their repetition in certain contexts suggests an early attempt at standardization and record keeping. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, which had a strong religious and monumental role, Cretan hieroglyphs seem to have been used, mainly for administrative and economic purposes tied to the tracking of commodities, ownership, and transactions. Clay, palm leaf tablets, sealings, and nodules bearing these symbols have been found in storage rooms and archives, often associated with trade goods, livestock, textiles, oil, and foodstuffs. This administrative origin of writing shows that even at its inception, literacy in Minoan Crete was a practical tool wielded by an elite bureaucratic class, most likely scribes attached to palace complexes. These scribes would have been trained not only in writing but in numeracy, accounting, religious calendars, and possibly foreign languages, given the extensive trade Minoans engaged in with Egypt, the Levant, and the wider Aegean. As Minoan society evolved, so too did its script. Around 1800 BCE, a new system emerged, Linear A more abstract and linear form of writing that retained some elements of the earlier hieroglyphs, but introduced a more standardized set of signs written, primarily on clay tablets. Linear A is the script most closely associated with the mature Minoan palatial period, and was used throughout Crete and some Aegean islands for several centuries. It is from Linear A that the later Linear B script used by the Mycenaeans would be adapted. However, while Linear B has been successfully deciphered as an early form of Greek, Linear A remains undeciphered, its language still unknown. The script consists of about 90 syllabic signs, along with ideograms, symbols representing goods or concepts, numerals, and administrative marks. Linear A tablets have been found in palace archives, religious shrines, and trade outposts, indicating a diverse range of use. Most of the inscriptions seem to deal with economic transactions, inventories, offerings, and distributions of goods. For example, one might find a tablet listing quantities of grain, oil, or wool, along with recipient symbols or designations of location. This reflects a highly centralized and record-conscious society that managed agricultural surplus, stored commodities, organized labor, and possibly maintained tax-like systems of resource collection. Yet the mystery of Linear A lies in its dual nature. It was simultaneously a bureaucratic script and a vehicle for ritual language. Some inscriptions found on libation tables, stone vessels, or votive artifacts suggest that the script was also used in religious contexts. These inscriptions are often formulaic, repetitive, and may contain prayers, offerings, invocations, or liturgical phrases. Their placement on altars and in shrines, sometimes accompanied by sacred symbols like the labries or horns of consecration, suggests that literacy in Minoan Crete was not strictly secular but deeply entwined with ritual performance and sacred space. The language behind Linear A has been debated for decades. Some scholars propose it was a non-Indo-European Minoan tongue, perhaps related to ancient Anatolian or pre-Hellenic languages, while others suggest it reflects a lost isolate unique to Crete and unrelated to any known language family. The lack of bilingual inscriptions, like a Minoan or Rosetta Stone, has made decipherment extraordinarily difficult. Still, computational analysis, comparative linguistics, and archaeological context have helped scholars classify certain signs, groupings, and grammatical patterns. While we may not yet read Minoan, we can often guess the function of inscriptions based on form, placement, and parallel usage. Another important context for Minoan writing was in the use of seal stones, which functioned as both administrative tools and personal or ceremonial items, carved from precious or semi-precious stones such as agate, carnelian, or steadite. These seals often bore both images and script. They were used to stamp clay sealings on doors, containers, documents, or bundles, both as a mark of identity and as a way to prevent tampering. Some seals include Linear A or hieroglyphic signs alongside intricate images of gods, animals, rituals, or mythic scenes, suggesting a merging of literacy, iconography, and personal power. Ownership of a seal implied a degree of literacy, or at least participation in the literate bureaucracy. Many seals were worn as pendants or rings, suggesting that writing and identity were physically and socially intertwined. The practice of sealing was not just about control or organization, it was a ritualized action, a daily enactment of authority, boundary making, and symbolic communication. Minoan writing was also employed on stone libation tables, ceramic vessels, and metal objects, further blurring the line between literacy and ritual. Some inscribed objects may have been votive offerings, left in caves, sanctuaries, or tombs. In such cases, writing was part of a sacred transaction, a message to the gods, a permanent trace of devotion, or a request for blessing. The act of inscribing may have been seen as magical or consecrating, turning ordinary materials into spiritual tokens. The geographical distribution of linear A inscriptions found not only at Knossos and Phaistos, but also at smaller centers like Zakros, Akrotiri, and K indicates a fairly widespread literacy among elites and administrators. However, writing never seems to have been fully democratized in Minoan society. It remained a specialized skill confined to scribes, priests, and officials, those who had both the training and the authority to wield it. The physical evidence also suggests that Minoan writing was not intended for public display or mass communication. Unlike later Greek or Egyptian scripts, we find no monumental inscriptions, no stelae proclaiming laws, no narrative histories carved in stone. Instead, Minoan writing was private, fluid, administrative, and often ephemeral, impressed into clay before firing, scratched into soft surfaces, written in ink on parchment or wood that has long since vanished. Its visibility was likely limited to those who worked within the bureaucratic or ritual systems, and its messages were often practical, sacred, or both. The relationship between writing and palatial administration is perhaps best seen at the so-called darchives of Knossos and other palaces, where clusters of tablets were found grouped by type, purpose, and storage method. These archives were likely the domain of scribes, trained men and women who maintained the flow of information within the palace economy. They tracked incoming tributes, outgoing goods, ritual offerings, land ownership, and labor assignments. The tablets were organized by topic: one shelf for livestock, another for textile distributions, another for religious offerings. The scribes may have worked with tally sticks, ink, styluses, and memory training, functioning like ancient accountants, record keepers, and priests all in one. When disaster struck, fire, earthquake, or invasion, the buildings burned, but the tablets, hardened in the flames, survived. Ironically, the destruction of the palaces preserved the writing for modern archaeology. Without those fires, we might know even less of the Minoan scriptural legacy. As the Minoan civilization declined due to natural disaster, internal instability, or Mycenaean conquest, the writing systems too began to fade or transform. Linear A gave way to Linear B, adopted and adapted by the incoming Mycenaeans to record their early Greek dialect. This transition marks not only a change in script, but a cultural shift from the fluid, sacred, symbolic world of Minoan Crete to the more hierarchical, militarized, and male-dominated world of Mycenaean Greece. The Linear B tablets, while decipherable, are cold and utilitarian lists of goods, chariots, slaves, and grain. They lack the spiritual and poetic resonance suspected in Linear A, and yet, the fact that Linear B evolved directly from Minoan script confirms that the Minoans left behind a lasting linguistic legacy, one that shaped the development of Greek writing and, through it, Western literacy itself. In conclusion, the writing systems of Minoan Crete, mysterious, symbolic, elegant, offer a tantalizing glimpse into a lost world where script was not just functional but magical, sacred, and aesthetic. Whether on clay tablets, carved seals, libation vessels, or palace archives, Minoan writing expressed a civilization that understood the power of symbol not just to record, but to invoke, consecrate, and preserve meaning. Though we may not yet read their words, the signs remain, etched in stone, pressed in clay, and engraved in memory. They are silent messages from a people who saw the world not only in images and movement, but also in signs, each stroke a bridge between the known and they. Mysterious. To unlock the secrets of Linear A is to come one step closer to understanding the soul of Minoan Crete. Until then, we listen to the silence between the symbols, reading not with the eye alone, but with imagination, intuition, and awe. The rise and prosperity of Minoan Crete was fundamentally anchored in the sea, a shimmering highway that encircled the island like a protective mother, opening channels for exchange, exploration, communication, and conquest. From the earliest stages of its development, the Minoan civilization demonstrated a deep affinity with the maritime world, and its seafaring prowess became not only the engine of its economy, but also the essence of its cultural identity. Surrounded by the Aegean, Ionian, and Mediterranean waters, the Minoans were uniquely positioned to harness the maritime networks that connected the ancient world. Their ships, carved from local timber and powered by sails and oars, were among the most advanced vessels of their time, capable of transporting goods, people, and ideas across vast distances. The strategic location of Crete between Europe, Asia, and Africa made it a natural crossroads, a cultural and commercial hub where Minoan traders acted as intermediaries between the civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, the Cyclades, and mainland Greece. In their sleek ships, they carried the products of their island olive oil, wine, pottery, textiles, saffron, timber, and metal goods, and returned with exotic imports such as gold, ivory, copper, spices, gemstones, and luxury items that graced the palaces of Knossos, Phaistos, Melia, and Zakros. This mercantile vitality not only enriched the Minoan economy, but helped to forge a cosmopolitan society, deeply influenced by foreign aesthetics, customs, and technologies. While remaining distinctly Cretan in expression, Minoan trade, however, was not merely a matter of commerce. It was a ritualized, prestigious, and often diplomatic affair, conducted within a framework of sacred exchange, seasonal festivals, and interpolity relationships that reinforced alliances, peace, and cultural diffusion. At the heart of Minoan maritime success was their sophisticated shipbuilding and navigational expertise. Though no complete Minoan ship has been recovered, frescoes such as the famous flotilla scene from Akrotiri on Thera, along with clay models and Egyptian references, reveal much about the design and operation of Minoan vessels. These ships were long, narrow, and shallow-hulled, ideal for both coastal navigation and open-sea voyages, equipped with a central mast and a square sail, as well as multiple oars along each side. Minoan ships balanced speed with maneuverability. They were capable of carrying both cargo and passengers, and likely included deckhouses or shelters for long journeys. The maritime scenes depicted in frescoes show fleets of ships sailing in procession, sometimes escorted by dolphins, suggesting not just commercial travel but also ceremonial or diplomatic missions. Navigation would have been conducted using visible landmarks, the stars, the sun, seasonal wind patterns, and the currents of the Mediterranean. Knowledge of these routes was likely passed down through generations of Minoan sailors, captains, and pilots, possibly encoded in oral traditions or sacred cosmologies. The Minoans were perhaps the first true thalassocracy sea power civilization whose wealth and influence were based on control of maritime routes and port access rather than territorial conquest. This mastery of the sea allowed them to extend their influence without the need for standing armies or fortifications, though some harbor sites show signs of protective towers and watch points. Minoan ports such as Kamos, Moklas, and Palakastro served as crucial gateways to the wider world. These ports were not only centers of shipping activity, but also bustling commercial towns with warehouses, markets, shrines, workshops, and administrative offices. Goods arriving from Egypt, the Levant, or Anatolia were stored, redistributed, or transformed through local craftsmanship before being traded again. The inland palaces functioned as redistribution centers, collecting resources from the countryside, storing them in massive jars and granaries, and directing their flow outward through a centrally controlled economic system. Linear A tablets found in storage rooms and archives record inventories of goods, olive oil, grain, textiles, perfumes, detailing the remarkable efficiency of Minoan logistics. The trade networks established by the Minoans were far-reaching. With Egypt, they exchanged oils, timber, and pottery in return for papyrus, gold, and luxury crafts. From Syria and the Levant came precious dyes, copper, incense, and glass. With Anatolia, they traded metals and wool. And from the Cycladic Islands and mainland Greece, they obtained silver, obsidian, and labor. In return, Minoan pottery, especially the elegant kamares, ware, and later marine-style ceramics became highly prized throughout the eastern Mediterranean, often found in tombs and palatial contexts far from Crete. These items were not simply containers, they were symbols of status, culture, and aesthetic innovation, spreading Minoan influence in a uniquely artistic form. One of the most fascinating aspects of Minoan trade was its integration with religious and ritual life. Many trading missions may have doubled as pilgrimages, diplomatic embassies, or festival expeditions, wherein goods were exchanged not merely for profit, but in the context of gift economies, mutual, sacred, and symbolic exchanges that reinforced relationships and social harmony. The presence of Minoan-style frescoes, figurines, and architecture in distant sites such as Akrotiri on Thera, Alalak in Syria, and even in Egyptian tombs, suggests that Minoan influence was more than commercial, it was cultural and spiritual. This diffusion may have involved the migration of artisans, priests, traders, and possibly entire communities who carried with them not only goods but worldviews, myths, and rituals. Some scholars suggest that the Minoans maintained religious outposts or sanctuaries abroad, where deities such as the snake goddess, the bull god, or the great mother were venerated in forms adapted to local traditions. These sanctuaries may have served as centers of exchange, diplomacy, and multicultural interaction. Likewise, Minoan palaces on Crete likely received foreign delegations, whose arrival was celebrated with festivals, bull games, and offerings, reinforcing Crete's status as a sacred and cosmopolitan center of the Bronze Age Mediterranean. The economic impact of trade on Minoan society was profound. The influx of exotic goods and materials stimulated local industries, metalwork, pottery, textile production, fresco painting, and architecture. Craftsmen began to experiment with new forms, materials, and techniques inspired by their contact with foreign styles. The Minoan elite, enriched by trade, adorned themselves with imported jewelry, ivory combs, and perfumed oils, lived in palaces filled with Egyptian alabaster, and dined using silver and gold utensils. Social stratification may have been reinforced by access to exotic goods and foreign contact, with the ruling class acting as gatekeepers of the island's wealth. However, the benefits of trade were not confined to elites. The entire island economy, farmers, shepherds, potters, weavers, shipbuilders, and port workers, was enmeshed in the wider system of production, transport, and distribution. Trade allowed for resource optimization, reducing local scarcities through imports and expanding markets for surplus goods. It also fostered interdependence among Minoan cities and between Crete and its neighbors, creating a network of shared interests that may have reduced conflict and encouraged peaceful relations. Despite this largely peaceful and prosperous maritime dominance, the Minoans were not without rivals and challenges. The Mycenaeans of mainland Greece, emerging as a formidable power in the late Bronze Age, eventually adopted many aspects of Minoan trade, scripty, linear bay, and maritime practices, perhaps first as partners and later as competitors. There is archaeological evidence of Minoan presence on the Greek mainland and Mycenaean goods in Crete, suggesting both trade and eventual conquest. Around 1450 BCE, the Minoan palaces except Knossos were destroyed or abandoned, and Mycenaean rulers took over Knossos, adapting Minoan administrative and artistic systems. Whether this transition was peaceful, violent, or gradual remains debated, but it marked a significant turning point in Aegean history. Earlier, around 1600 BCE, the Thera eruption, modern Santorini, caused devastating tsunamis and atmospheric disruptions that may have crippled Minoan trade fleets and damaged coastal ports. Though the civilization survived, such natural disasters highlighted the vulnerability of maritime systems subject not only to politics but to the immense power of nature. The legacy of Minoan trade and seafaring outlived their civilization. The memory of a seafaring people, elegant, artistic, and rich, echoed in Greek myths of Atlantis, Minos, and Daedalus. The Minoans set the template for later Aegean and Mediterranean maritime cultures: Phoenicians, Greeks, Etruscans, who also built their fortunes on the sea. Their methods of shipbuilding, port management, and trade organization influenced centuries of navigation. Their art and architecture, spread through commerce, became models for beauty and innovation. Their ability to use trade not only as an economic tool but as a medium of cultural diplomacy, spiritual expansion, and artistic diffusion stands as one of the hallmarks of their greatness. Minoan Crete, at its height, was a dazzling maritime civilization whose ships carried not just goods but identity, faith, and vision, gliding across the blue waters like myths in motion. The Minoan civilization, which flourished on the island of Crete during the Bronze Age approximately between 3000 and 1100 BCE, was one of the most advanced and sophisticated cultures of the ancient world. Central to their prosperity, social stability, and artistic expression was their mastery of agriculture and food production. Blessed with fertile soil, a mild Mediterranean climate, and strategic access to maritime trade routes, the Minoans developed an agricultural system that was not only efficient but remarkably innovative for its time. Food was not merely a matter of survival in Minoan society. It was deeply embedded in their social rituals, religious practices, and economic organization, forming a critical foundation for their culture and influence across the Aegean and beyond. Minoan agriculture was fundamentally shaped by the geography of Crete. The island's mountainous interior, interspersed with valleys and plains, provided a natural topography for mixed farming practices. Terracing techniques were employed to prevent erosion and maximize the use of arable land on hillsides. In the lowland areas, the Minoans cultivated a variety of grains and legumes, while the more rugged areas supported the growth of hardy crops like olives and grapes. Their settlements were often situated close to fertile plains, rivers, or springs, key factors that allowed them to sustain relatively dense populations for the time. Grain cultivation formed the bedrock of Minoan agriculture. The primary cereals grown included emmer wheat and barley, both staples in the diet of the ancient Cretans. These grains were likely sown in the autumn and harvested in the spring or early summer. Depending on regional conditions, storage facilities found in Minoan palatial complexes such as the immense pithoi, large storage jars, discovered at Knossos and Phaistos, suggest that the Minoans produced surplus grain and maintained centralized storage systems. These surpluses were vital not only for ensuring food security, but also for supporting trade and redistributive economies managed through palace bureaucracies. In addition to cereals, the Minoans cultivated pulses such as lentils, chickpeas, and broad beans. These legumes played an essential role in maintaining soil fertility due to their nitrogen-fixing properties and were also an important source of protein. In a diet that relied more heavily on plant-based nutrition than on meat, archaeobotanical evidence from excavations has confirmed the widespread presence of these crops, pointing to a well-balanced agricultural model that emphasized both variety and sustainability. One of the most iconic aspects of Minoan agriculture was the cultivation of olives and grapes, two crops that would come to define Mediterranean agriculture. For millennia, olive trees were particularly suited to the Cretan landscape and climate. The Minoans not only harvested olives for consumption, but also pressed them to produce olive oil, which was used in cooking, lighting, cosmetics, and religious rituals. The importance of olive oil in Minoan society is underscored by its appearance in frescoes, religious offerings, and the inclusion of olive branches in ceremonial contexts. Viticulture, or the cultivation of grapes, was another highly developed component of the Minoan agricultural system. Grapevines were cultivated both for fresh consumption and for the production of wine, a beverage that held significant cultural, religious, and economic value. Archaeological finds, including wine presses and amphorae, ceramic storage vessels, provide evidence of wine production and storage on a scale that implies both domestic consumption and trade. Wine was likely consumed at banquets, religious festivals, and other communal gatherings, reflecting its integration into the social fabric of Minoan life. Minoan farmers also grew a range of fruits and vegetables, contributing to a diet that was rich, varied, and nutritionally balanced. Figs, pomegranates, apples, and pears were cultivated in orchards or gathered in the wild, while vegetables such as onions, garlic, cucumbers, and leeks were grown in kitchen gardens near homes or palaces. The presence of these crops has been attested through seed remains, ancient tools, and iconographic evidence found in wall paintings and pottery decorations. Honey, produced by domesticated bees, was the primary sweetener and also used in religious offerings and possibly in fermented drinks like mead. Animal husbandry played a supporting but important role in the agricultural economy of the Minoans. They raised cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs for meat. Milk, wool, and labor, cattle in particular, held a special place in Minoan society, not only as draft animals for plowing fields and transporting goods, but also as sacred creatures featured prominently. In religious iconography, including the famous bull-leaping frescoes, sheep and goats provided meat and dairy products such as cheese and yogurt, while pigs were reared for consumption and possibly ritual use. Poultry such as chickens and ducks, as well as eggs, also contributed to the Minoan diet. Although these animals are less frequently mentioned in the archaeological record, fishing and marine foraging were critical supplements to agriculture, especially given Crete's insular geography. Minoans exploited the abundant fish, shellfish, and sea mammals in surrounding waters. Fishing tools such as hooks, nets, and harpoons have been found at coastal sites, along with artistic depictions of marine life, suggesting that seafood was not only a dietary mainstay but also a source of cultural inspiration. Salted or dried fish might have been preserved for trade or storage, and the inclusion of marine motifs in Minoan art indicates the significance of the sea in both practical and symbolic terms. Food preparation and consumption in Minoan Crete reflected both the functionality of sustenance and the elegance of communal dining. Hearths, ovens, and clay cooking pots found in homes and palaces suggest a variety of cooking techniques: roasting, boiling, baking, and stewing. Bread was a dietary staple, prepared from ground barley or wheat and cooked in stone or clay ovens. Olive oil, herbs, and spices enhanced the flavor of simple dishes, while evidence of feasting and banquet scenes in art indicate that the Minoans placed high cultural value on shared meals and hospitality. Minoan palatial complexes such as Knossos, Molia, and Zakros function not only as political centers but also as hubs of food redistribution. Large storerooms filled with pithoi and ceilings indicate a highly organized system of collecting, storing, and redistributing agricultural goods perhaps as part of taxation, tribute, or ritual. These practices reflect a centralized economy in which the palace elite exercised control over food production and allocation, while also ensuring food security for the wider population. Feasts held in the palace courts may have reinforced social hierarchies while fostering a sense of unity and cultural identity. Religion and food were intimately linked in Minoan culture. Offerings of grain, wine, fruit, and animals have been found at sacred sites, including mountain peak sanctuaries and cave shrines. The ritual slaughter of animals, libations of wine or oil, and presentation of baked goods all played a role in Minoan religious ceremonies. These acts were believed to appease deities, honor the earth's fertility, and ensure the continued prosperity of the land and people. The centrality of food and religious practice underscores its symbolic as well as practical significance in Minoan society. In the flourishing civilization of the Minoans, which thrived on the island of Crete during the Bronze Age, women held a place of striking prominence and distinction, a role that distinguished Minoan society from many of its ancient contemporaries. The position of women in Minoan society has fascinated archaeologists, historians, and anthropologists alike due to the apparent balance of gender roles, the cultural depictions of powerful priestesses and female figures in Minoan art, and the unique integration of women in ceremonial, religious, and economic life, far from being relegated to domestic obscurity. Minoan women appear to have been actively involved in public, religious, and possibly even political spheres, challenging modern preconceptions about gender roles in the ancient world. This prominent visibility and participation were evident in frescoes, figurines, seals, pottery, and the architectural arrangement of palaces and sanctuaries, which collectively offer glimpses into the roles women played in shaping the cultural and spiritual landscape of Minoan Crete. Minoan art offers some of the clearest and most compelling insights into the life and status of women in this ancient society. Perhaps nowhere is this more apparent than in the striking frescoes that adorn the palace walls of Knossos, Phaistos, and other centers of Minoan civilization. In these elaborate scenes, women are frequently depicted participating in religious rituals, dancing in processions, attending ceremonies, and even engaging in athletic contests such as bull leaping, an event long associated with ritualistic and symbolic meaning. The sheer number of depictions of women, often presented as central figures, suggests not only their cultural importance but also hints at a deeply integrated gender structure that granted women authority and reverence, particularly in the spiritual realm. Their dress, too, is a notable point of discussion. The iconic flounce skirts, open bodice garments that expose the breasts, elaborate jewelry, and finely coiled hairstyles suggest that women took part in a sophisticated fashion culture and perhaps even dictated styles and norms, pointing to a dynamic role in both aesthetic and societal leadership. Religious life in Minoan Crete appears to have been heavily centered around female deities and priestesses, further underscoring the elevated role of women. The central Minoan goddess, often referred to by modern scholars as the Great Mother or simply the Snake Goddess, embodied fertility, nature, protection, and renewal. This deity, often shown flanked by serpents and sometimes lions or birds of prey, was a powerful emblem of the female principle and the sacred feminine. The reverence for this goddess and the frequency with which she is represented indicates a matrifocal or at least a spiritually gynocentric society. The fact that priestesses seem to have led religious rites and that women were regularly shown performing complex ceremonial functions speaks to the embedded authority women held in sacred affairs. Some archaeologists argue that Minoan priestesses may have served as oracles, spiritual leaders, and caretakers of sanctuaries, commanding both respect and devotion. In the mountain sanctuaries, peak shrines, and caves that dotted the island, female-led rituals possibly linked to seasonal agricultural cycles and fertility formed a central part of communal worship. This close association between women and the divine may have helped reinforce a social structure that valued the feminine not only in the home but also at the heart of Minoan cosmology. The home and family life of Minoan women, while difficult to reconstruct in full, also suggest a society in which women enjoyed a high degree of agency and respect. Unlike in later patriarchal Greek and Roman systems where women's movements and legal rights were limited, the Minoan domestic scene appears to have allowed women some independence. Residential complexes often included private quarters that suggest personal ownership or dedicated space. And the prominence of women in funerary art and ancestor cults further implies that their memory and lineage held value. The presence of female figurines in homes and shrines points to the centrality of the feminine in both public and private worship. While the economic contributions of women are harder to assess directly due to the nature of the surviving evidence, it is likely that they participated in agricultural management, textile production, pottery, and market trade. Some Linear A tablets, though still undeciphered, contain gendered figures that may indicate female involvement in bureaucratic and administrative systems, possibly as managers of workshops or property. This paints a picture of a complex and interconnected economy where women were more than passive dependents. They were participants and even leaders. Education and skill development among Minoan women likely paralleled the sophisticated artistic and cultural achievements for which the civilization is renowned. The level of artistic representation and fine craftsmanship seen in female-dominated industries such as weaving, embroidery, and perfumery indicates that girls and young women were trained from an early age in specialized crafts. The importance of textiles, particularly in trade and ceremonial functions, suggests that women played a central economic role in producing goods for both domestic use and foreign exchange. Similarly, the depiction of young girls in frescoes engaging in dance, acrobatics, or rituals implies that physical education and ceremonial training were part of their upbringing. The prominence of these young female figures, often adorned with jewelry, ribbons, and painted makeup, emphasizes that Minoan society invested in the socialization, adornment, and development of girls as future priestesses, wives, artisans, and community leaders. It is plausible to believe that through their visibility in rituals and processions, girls learned their societal roles and developed identities anchored in communal responsibility and spiritual leadership. Marriage, inheritance, and family lineage in Minoan society remain speculative but can be inferred to some extent from visual and archaeological evidence. While no conclusive texts survive that outline legal codes or marriage contracts, some scholars suggest that matrilineal inheritance could have played a role in Minoan family structure, given the emphasis on female deities and the prominence of women in funerary contexts. This theory is bolstered by the idea that lineage and property may have passed through the female line, particularly in religious or noble families. In such a system, a woman's status as mother, daughter, and wife would have had significant implications for the continuation of lineage, control of estates, and transmission of spiritual authority. Marriage may have been more flexible than in later Greek systems, with women potentially having more autonomy in choosing partners and controlling dowries or household assets. The presence of female heads of household in certain fresco scenes, often shown seated with attendants or in grand postures, reinforces the idea that Minoan women, particularly in elite classes, commanded respect, wealth, and influence, despite the abundance of visual and symbolic evidence attesting to the elevated role of women in Minoan society. There are limitations and ongoing debates in scholarly circles. Some argue that the depictions of women in art may not fully reflect the realities of everyday life, but instead represent idealized roles tied to ritual or mythology. Others question the extent of female political power, noting the lack of definitive evidence for queens or female rulers in Minoan palaces. Still, the overwhelming presence of women in all forms of Minoan cultural production, ceramics, seals, frescoes, jewelry, figurines, and architecture makes it difficult to dismiss their central role. Moreover, the absence of overt military or patriarchal dominance in Minoan iconography further supports the notion of a more balanced or even woman-centered societal structure. This egalitarianism, whether symbolic or practical, places Minoan Crete in stark contrast to the male-dominated civilizations of Mycenaean Greece, Mesopotamia, and Egypt, which often confined women to the margins of public life. In conclusion, the women of Minoan Crete were not merely passive figures in the background of a flourishing civilization. They were active participants, spiritual leaders, economic contributors, and central symbols of power and fertility. The richness of Minoan artistic and archaeological remains offers a rare glimpse into a society where the feminine was celebrated rather than suppressed, where women walked alongside men in ritual and possibly administrative life, and where the image of womanhood was not just revered, it was sacred. Through their role in religious ceremonies, their prominence in artistic representation, their possible participation in administration and craft, and their integral place in Minoan cosmology, Minoan women offer us a vision of gender that challenges the typical narrative of the ancient world. Their legacy continues to captivate scholars and the public alike, standing as a powerful testament to a civilization where the balance of gender may have contributed to its vibrancy, harmony, and enduring mystery. The cultivation of olives, in particular, became a critical part of the Minoan economy and diet, and their knowledge of pressing techniques led to the large-scale production of olive oil, Wine was another major export, requiring skill in vine cultivation and fermentation. The Minoans also practiced animal husbandry, raising cattle, sheep, goats and pigs, goats and pigs, goats and pigs, and developed selective breeding techniques to improve stock. Their knowledge of crop cycles, weather patterns, and soil types reflects a practical science rooted in observation and adaptation, ensuring that agriculture remained stable despite geographic limitations. In the realm of tools and metallurgy, the Minoans showed remarkable proficiency in bronze working, a hallmark of their age. The ability to alloy copper and tin to produce bronze enabled the creation of stronger and more durable tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects. Minoan smiths produced chisels, knives, axes, and sickles, many of which were finely crafted and displayed artistic embellishments. Bronze swords and daggers were often engraved with scenes of hunting or mythology, demonstrating both functionality and aesthetic expression. Goldsmithing was another area of great achievement, and Minoan artisans created intricate jewelry, earrings, necklaces, diadems, and rings that required fine tools and high-temperature furnaces. The use of lost wax casting and repoussé techniques allowed them to achieve detailed and complex forms. These methods required advanced knowledge of metallurgy, chemistry, and precision in temperature control, pointing to an elite class of trained artisans whose work was both technically and symbolically valued. The Minoans were also pioneers in ceramics, developing pottery techniques that not only met everyday needs but also served religious and artistic purposes. Their wheel-thrown pottery, ranging from storage pithoi to delicate drinking vessels, demonstrated superior knowledge of clay composition, firing techniques, and decoration. Pottery styles such as Kamare's ware and marine style reflect an evolution in aesthetic preferences and technical ability. Kamare's ware, with its thin walls, vibrant colors, and intricate motifs, required precise control of kilns and firing temperatures, while marine-style jars with octopuses and sea motifs highlighted the importance of maritime culture and demanded skilled brushwork and spatial awareness. Pottery was not only used domestically, but also in trade, often stamped or marked with symbols, possibly indicating ownership or contents. The potter's wheel itself, believed to have been introduced during the early Minoan period, revolutionized ceramic production, enabling faster and more symmetrical creation of vessels. This innovation in form and function was crucial in developing a recognizable Minoan aesthetic that traveled with their goods across the Mediterranean. Seafaring and maritime technology were among the most defining aspects of Minoan innovation, enabling them to establish far-reaching trade networks that connected them to Egypt, the Levant, Anatolia, and mainland Greece. The Minoans developed strong, agile ships designed for both cargo and passenger transport. These ships featured long, narrow hulls optimized for speed and were powered by rows of oarsmen and sails. Minoan harbors, such as those at Kalmos and Amnisos, included quays, storage facilities, and loading ramps, suggesting an organized and strategic approach to maritime commerce. They likely used navigational knowledge based on the stars, coastlines, and wind patterns, allowing them to travel safely across open waters. Ship frescoes, such as the famous flotilla seen from Akrotiri, depict fleets of elaborately decorated ships, signaling both pride in naval strength and the ceremonial significance of sea travel. The Minoan dominance of the Aegean is sometimes referred to as a form of thalassocracy, or rule by sea power, indicating how essential maritime innovation was to their political and economic strategy. Writing and record-keeping, though less technologically mechanical than other innovations, represented a significant intellectual leap for the Minoans. The linear A script, still largely undeciphered, was used to keep administrative records on clay tablets, suggesting a system of inventory management, taxation, and redistribution. The existence of seal stones and signet rings used to mark documents and storage containers points to a well-developed bureaucracy and secure method of authentication. The Minoans also employed pictographic signs on pottery and wall art that may have conveyed information about trade goods, religious practices, or social hierarchy. The technological apparatus behind writing included the creation of styluses, preparation of clay tablets, and storage systems to preserve records. This ability to encode, preserve, and transmit data gave the Minoans a cognitive and logistical advantage in managing their complex society, while the content of linear A remains mysterious. The form and function of writing as a technology of control and continuity cannot be overstated in assessing the Minoan intellectual legacy. In textile production, Minoan women and possibly men engaged in spinning, dyeing, and weaving using vertical looms and spindles. The presence of loom weights, dyeing vats, and flax remains in archaeological sites indicates a well-established industry. Minoan textiles were likely colorful and patterned, incorporating complex designs and symbolic motifs. The dyeing process may have used natural substances such as saffron, madder root, and indigo, requiring chemical knowledge and experimental refinement. Textiles were essential not just for clothing but also as offerings in religious rituals, and possibly as trade goods or indicators of status. The organization of textile workshops, possibly within palatial centers, demonstrates the coordination between technology, labor, and economic management. These workshops may have employed dozens of individuals in a single facility, functioning like proto-industrial production centers. Glassmaking and faience production were other notable crafts that point to the experimental spirit of Minoan artisans. Though not as prolific as Egyptian production, Minoan faience glazed non-clay material was used to produce beads, amulets, and small vessels. The technique required kilns capable of reaching high temperatures and the ability to manipulate alkalis and silicates to achieve glazing. The final products were often bright blue or green and used in ceremonial or decorative contexts. These materials, along with obsidian and stone vases, show the Minoans' aptitude in working with a wide range of substances using advanced methods. In sum, the Minoan civilization's technological and engineering achievements were not isolated accomplishments, but interconnected innovations that defined their societal success. Their ability to build, irrigate, navigate, communicate, and craft with such sophistication reveals a deep understanding of both the material world and the systems needed to harness it. These innovations were not solely functional, they were expressions of culture, belief, and ambition. The blending of artistry with practicality, spirituality with science, and tradition with experimentation made the Minoans stand out among ancient civilizations. Their legacy, preserved in ruins and artifacts, reminds us that technology is not just about machines and tools, but about how societies imagine and shape their world. The Minoan civilization of Crete, flourishing during the Bronze Age from approximately 2600 to 1100 BCE, was not only remarkable for its stunning palaces, sophisticated art, and maritime prowess, but also for its deeply rooted and highly structured society. Underpinning the Minoan cultural framework was a meticulously organized social hierarchy and a dynamic economic system, both of which were intertwined in ways that defined daily life, governance, and the long-term stability of the civilization. The Minoan social order was not a rigid caste system in the traditional sense, but rather a flexible stratification based on roles, wealth, specialization, and possibly even meritocratic factors such as skill or devotion to religious and royal duties. The Minoan economy, on the other hand, was multifaceted, encompassing agriculture, trade, industry, and religious institutions as economic agents. It formed the backbone of Minoan power, enabling them to become one of the most influential civilizations of the ancient Mediterranean world. At the top of the Minoan social pyramid stood the ruling elite, which included the monarchs or high rulers often referred to by modern historians as priest-kings. Though the exact nature of their political titles remains speculative due to the lack of deciphered linear A texts, these rulers lived in sprawling palace complexes such as those at Knossos, Phaistos, and Malea, which served not only as residences but also as administrative, economic, and religious centers. The palaces were the beating heart of Minoan life, from which power emanated and to which wealth flowed. These elite figures likely wielded both secular and sacred authority, overseeing trade, land distribution, construction, legal matters, and religious ceremonies. Their position was buttressed by a class of nobles and bureaucrats, individuals who managed various sectors of palace life, including the redistribution of goods, the maintenance of storage facilities, and the coordination of labor forces. These officials were literate, skilled in the use of scripts such as linear A, and instrumental in the collection of taxes, the management of records, and the oversight of temple wealth. Beneath the ruling elite were the artisans, merchants, and skilled laborers, who occupied the urban and semi-urban spaces of Minoan society. This class played a vital role in the economic engine of Crete, as their craftsmanship and entrepreneurial spirit fed both domestic consumption and international trade. Artisans included potters, textile weavers, metalworkers, textile weavers, fresco painters, sculptors, and carpenters, many of whom operated in workshops either attached to the palaces or within independent artisan quarters. Their works finely decorated pottery, ornate jewelry, and exquisitely painted frescoes reflected a society deeply attuned to aesthetics, symbolism, and ritual. These products were not only used locally, but were also exported across the Aegean, Anatolia, the Levant, and Egypt, earning the Minoans a reputation for luxury and refinement. Merchants facilitated the movement of these goods, establishing maritime trade routes that connected Crete with the broader Bronze Age world. Their interactions brought not only wealth but also foreign influences, seen in Minoan art, architecture, and possibly even their religious practices. The farming class formed the broad base of Minoan society, and while less visible in the archaeological record, their contributions were foundational. Minoan agriculture was diverse and well-developed, with farmers cultivating grains such as barley and wheat, legumes, olives, grapes, and figs. The terraced hillsides and fertile plains of Crete provided an ideal environment for this activity. These farmers were not merely subsistence-level laborers, they contributed to the palace redistribution system by delivering surplus produce, which was then stored in massive pithoi, storage jars, and redistributed to artisans, elites, and religious institutions. It is likely that some farmers owned their land, while others may have worked estates owned by the palace or noble families. Animal husbandry also played a significant role, especially in the raising of cattle, goats, sheep, and pigs, which provided meat, milk, wool, and leather. The surplus generated by these rural producers was vital to the palace economy, enabling feasts, festivals, and support for large non-agricultural populations. Women in Minoan society occupied a unique and elevated status, particularly when compared to their contemporaries in other ancient cultures. While much about their roles remains debated, the abundant artistic depictions of women in religious, ceremonial, and even athletic contexts suggest they held significant influence. Priestesses may have been part of the religious elite, administering rites, presiding over temple activities, and possibly advising rulers. Some scholars even propose that Minoan society may have been matrilineal or centered around powerful queen priestesses, although this remains unconfirmed. Regardless, women appear frequently in frescoes, wearing elaborate garments and participating in major events, indicating their social and possibly economic importance. In households, women likely managed domestic resources, weaving, food production, and child rearing. But some may have also been active in markets, workshops, or religious affairs, blurring the rigid lines between private and public spheres. Religion itself was not only a spiritual force, but also an economic and hierarchical one. Temples and religious centers, often attached to palaces, were sites of wealth accumulation, resource distribution, and labor organization. Offerings, tribute, and sacrificial goods were stored and managed by temple personnel, and the administration of festivals or building projects often required coordination with artisans and farmers. Religious offices, whether priestly or bureaucratic, were prestigious and sometimes hereditary, adding another layer to the social structure. The divinities of the Minoan pantheon, especially the central female deities associated with fertility, nature, and animals, reflected a worldview in which harmony with the land and cosmos was essential. Thus, those who mediated between the gods and the people, the religious elite held powerful social and symbolic roles. Economically, the Minoan civilization was both self-sufficient and externally oriented. Internally, it functioned as a redistributive economy centered on the palace system. Goods produced by farmers, herders, artisans, and workshops were brought to the palace, which then stored, recorded, and redistributed them according to social function and necessity. This system allowed for a degree of economic stability and planning, especially in times of scarcity or surplus. However, it also meant that the economy was highly centralized, and any disruption to palace administration, such as natural disaster or political upheaval, could have cascading effects across all levels of society. Externally, the Minoans were maritime traders par excellence. Their ships traversed the Mediterranean, exchanging Minoan goods for raw materials, luxury items, and foreign technologies. Copper from Cyprus, gold and ivory from Egypt, and exotic spices or woods from the Levant found their way into Minoan workshops and elite homes. These trade networks not only enriched the Cretan economy, but also connected it to a broader web of cultural exchange. In rural areas, the economy may have functioned with greater autonomy. Villages and outlying estates managed their own production and trade, perhaps with less reliance on the palace. Local elites could have overseen regional redistribution, acting as intermediaries between the central palace and rural producers. Some evidence even suggests that Minoan Crete was not a monolithic kingdom, but a collection of semi-independent centers, each with its own palace and administrative system. This decentralized political landscape might have fostered regional diversity in social structures and economic arrangements. Nonetheless, the core principles of surplus collection, labor organization, and religious patronage remained consistent across the island. The Minoan civilization, flourishing on the island of Crete from approximately 3000 BCE to 1450 BCE, stands as one of the most enigmatic and captivating cultures of the ancient world. While archaeological discoveries have provided us with invaluable insight into their architecture, art, religion, and daily life, it is through the lens of Greek mythology that the Minoans have captured the collective imagination of later civilizations. The ancient Greeks wove a complex tapestry of myths that revolved around the Minoan world, transforming real places and practices into epic tales of gods, monsters, and heroic deeds. Central to these myths is the figure of King Minos, a legendary ruler whose name now denotes the very civilization he was believed to have led. The relationship between myth and reality in the Minoan context is a fascinating interplay between fact and fiction, revealing how ancient cultures explained the unknown, interpreted their past, and projected their values through narrative traditions. The Greek myth of King Minos, the Minotaur, and the Labyrinth is one of the most famous tales associated with Crete, and it arguably serves as a symbolic lens through which many have come to view the Minoan world. According to legend, King Minos was the son of Zeus and Europa, the latter of whom was abducted by Zeus in the form of a bull and carried off to Crete. The couple had several sons, including Minos, who would later become a powerful and just ruler. Minos claimed that he had the support of the gods and proved this by asking Poseidon to send him a divine bull. The sea god complied, expecting Minos to sacrifice the animal in his honor. However, Minos, taken by the bull's beauty, chose to keep it. In retribution, Poseidon caused Minos' wife Pasiphae to fall in love with the bull, leading to the birth of the Minotaur, a monstrous creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. To contain the beast, the inventor Daedalus constructed the labyrinth, an intricate maze from which escape was nearly impossible. While clearly fantastical in its details, this myth reflects several core elements of Minoan culture and symbolism. The bull, a recurring motif in Minoan art and religion, appears frequently in frescoes and sculptures, often in the context of the ceremonial sport of bull leaping. This practice, which seems to have held ritualistic significance, involved acrobats vaulting over bulls in a performance that may have symbolized the triumph of human skill and courage over nature's brute force. It is not difficult to see how the prominence of bulls in Minoan life inspired later tales such as that of the Minotaur. Similarly, the concept of the labyrinth may have its roots in the sprawling and complex layout of the palace at Knossos, with its many interconnected rooms, corridors, and storage areas. To the early Greek visitors or storytellers who saw these ruins, the structure may have seemed like an elaborate maze, perfect fodder for a mythic tale of entrapment and escape. Moreover, the character of King Minos himself may be loosely based on real Minoan rulers, though it is unlikely that there was a single historical figure bearing that name. Rather, Minos may have been a title much like Pharaoh. In ancient Egypt, Greek writers such as Homer and Herodotus refer to Minos as a wise and powerful lawgiver, and even as a judge in the underworld. These portrayals suggest that the memory of Minoan rulers survived in oral tradition long after the civilization's decline, becoming idealized figures who embodied justice, authority, and divine favor. That the Greeks would elevate a Cretan king to such stature in their myths indicates a deep respect or perhaps awe for the lost civilization whose ruins they encountered. Another myth closely associated with the Minoans is the story of Daedalus and Icarus. Daedalus, the skilled craftsman who designed the labyrinth, later fell out of favor with King Minos and was imprisoned along with his son Icarus. In order to escape, Daedalus fashioned wings made of feathers and wax for himself and his son. They managed to fly away from Crete, but Icarus, ignoring his father's warnings, flew too close to the sun. The wax in his wings melted, and he plummeted into the sea and drowned. This myth, while often interpreted as a cautionary tale about hubris and disobedience, also serves as a testament to the Greeks' view of Crete as a center of technological innovation and artistic mastery. The story of Daedalus implies a culture with advanced craftsmanship and engineering skills, attributes that archaeologists have confirmed through discoveries of Minoan architecture, metallurgy, and argy. The myth of Europa and the bull also offers insight into the cultural and symbolic significance of Crete in the ancient imagination. Europa, a Phoenician princess, is abducted by Zeus in the form of a bull and taken to Crete, where she becomes the mother of Minos. This tale not only underscores the importance of bulls in Cretan culture, but also reflects historical trade and cultural exchanges between the Minoans and Eastern civilizations such as the Phoenicians. The movement of Europa from the east to Crete may symbolize the transfer of knowledge, art, and religious beliefs that characterized the Bronze Age Mediterranean world. Moreover, the myth positions Crete as a bridge between east and west, a liminal space where divine events occur and where human history is touched by the gods. Another myth with possible Minoan origins is the story of Talos, the bronze giant who guarded Crete against invaders. According to legend, Talos would patrol the island's shores and hurl stones at approaching ships, and he had a single vein filled with ichor, the divine fluid of the gods, sealed with a bronze nail. When the Argonauts approached Crete, Talos was defeated by Medea, who caused him to remove the nail and bleed to death. The image of a mechanical or semi-mechanical guardian echoes the advanced metalworking and possible automata attributed to the Minoans and their successors. The concept of a bronze guardian may also be rooted in actual Minoan statues or possibly fire beacons used for coastal defense. At the symbolic level, Talos represents the idea of Crete as a protected realm guarded not only by geography but by supernatural forces. These myths did more than simply entertain. They helped the Greeks and later civilizations make sense of the Minoans who by the time of classical Greece were already a distant memory. Their civilization buried beneath centuries of rubble and volcanic ash, the ruins of Knossos, the legends of King Minos, and the mysterious artistry of the Minoan world all contributed to a cultural narrative that blended archaeology with allegory and history with imagination. The Greeks saw in Crete a site of ancient grandeur, of divine intervention, and of cautionary tales, elements that would continue to inform literature, theater, and art for centuries to come. Historians and archaeologists have long debated the extent to which these myths can be tied to historical realities. Sir Arthur Evans, the British archaeologist who excavated Knossos in the early 20th century, was deeply influenced by the myths of King Minos and the Labyrinth. In fact, he was the one who coined the term Minoan to describe the civilization. Based on the prominence of King Minos in Greek legend, Evans believed that many of the myths had a kernel of truth and sought to interpret his findings in light of those stories. For example, the throne room at Knossos, with its ceremonial chair and symbolic frescoes, was identified by Evans as the seat of King Minos himself. The complexity of the palace layout lent further credence to the labyrinth association, while modern archaeologists are more cautious in making such direct connections. The influence of myth on early interpretations of Minoan culture is undeniable. The myths also reveal the perception of gender roles, power structures, and religious practices in Minoan society as filtered through Greek eyes. The depiction of Pasiphae, for instance, reflects ancient anxieties about female sexuality and divine punishment, while the Minotaur represents the monstrous consequence of breaking divine or natural laws. At the same time, figures like Ariadne Minos' daughter, who helps Theseus navigate the labyrinth, embody wisdom, compassion, and agency. Some scholars suggest that Ariadne may be a remnant of a Minoan goddess figure, later demoted in myth to a mortal princess. Indeed, the prominence of female figures in Minoan art and religion supports the theory that women held significant religious authority in their society, and that goddesses played central roles in Minoan belief systems. Beyond Greek mythology, Minoan influence may also be seen in Egyptian and Near Eastern legends, though these are less explicit. The trade networks that connected Crete with Egypt, Anatolia, and the Levant likely facilitated not only the exchange of goods but also stories, symbols, and religious ideas. It is possible that Minoan motifs such as the double axe labyrinth, sacred horns, and the bull were absorbed into the mythological systems of neighboring cultures. Likewise, Minoan myths may have evolved from older, pre-Greek traditions rooted in the rituals and cosmologies of the early Aegean world. In modern times, the myths surrounding the Minoans have continued to capture the imagination of writers, artists, and scholars. From paintings and novels to operas and films, the tales of Minos, the Minotaur, and the Labyrinth have been retold in countless forms. These retellings often reflect contemporary concerns, psychological, political, or existential, demonstrating the enduring power of these ancient stories. In this way, the myths serve not only as a